Digital transformation, lessons and trends headed into 2023, the future of change management, as well as cold rain in the cloud. Those are just a few of the things we're going to talk about in today's episode of Transformation Ground Control.
This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Cheatham. This is the podcast that we stream every Wednesday with new episodes covering everything related to digital transformation and everything you need to know related to transformation, including the strategy, people, process, and technology sides of change. Kyler, thanks for being here again today.
Thanks for having me.
Great episode planned for you today. Later in the show, we have a couple of guests that we're going to bring on. We're going to bring on first Bonnie Tinder, who's the founder and CEO of a company called Raven Intel. And we're going to talk about some of the quantitative lessons from system and software implementations in 2022, as well as some of the lessons and predictions or takeaways that we can take into 2023 as we plan our digital strategies. So stay tuned for Bonnie. She'll be on the show here shortly after our opening segment. And then later in the show, our second guest will be Tim Creasey, talking about the future of change management. And this is actually one of your top three picks for the top interviews that we've done in 2022, I should say. And it's a replay from earlier this year. So that was one of your favorites, Kyler, as well as one of mine. So we thought we'd replay that for you here today. And then starting the show today, we have a few different hot topics, including innovation in aviation startups. We're going to talk about food tech immersion in South Africa, or in Africa in general, not just South Africa. And then we're also going to talk about bring your own device policies and tech efficiency, as well as cold rain in the cloud. So what are some of these hot topics you have for us, Kyler?
Yeah, well, I want to talk about aviation, especially it's a current hot topic, not only in technology, but also just in our overall society in general, with a lot of travel going around for the holiday season throughout the world. So something interesting that's been happening with bigger aviation companies is they've been starting incubation startups. So almost like a startup within a large corporation. And a lot of times that model is to kind of just bring some innovation to processes that might have become stagnant or new ideas into the overall company. So specifically today, I want to talk about JetBlue Ventures. So JetBlue is a large global airline, mostly based out of the U.S. on the east side of the United States, but does fly globally. And they actually have invested in early stage partnerships with not only their own startup, but other startups within the travel and hospitality transportation industries. So they have 5 investment themes that they really look at. And most of the time it's focused on sustainable travel, because we talk a lot about how that's an emerging need in the overall transportation space. But it also looks at this quality of seamless customer-centric journeys. And basically it's reimagining the over accommodation experience, next generation of aviation operations, and enterprise technology. They talk about distribution, loyalty, and revenue management. And what they do is they utilize the big data to look at routes from over 100 billion itineraries in real time to garner insights on how they can not only create efficiencies, but they can also map customer data and give essentially additional demand to routes that are in need of additional pilots or anything like that to create that opening. So this to me is really interesting in the fact of not only leveraging that big data to do so, but utilizing other partners, which a lot of times have been a hard boundary for the aviation industry, that they've kind of tried to push against those third-party booking systems, but now actually leveraging the insights and data that they have to create more operational efficiencies and just an overall better customer experience. So wanted to get kind of your feedback on kind of transcending those party lines, if you will, around that was a more of a conflict that's become more of a data sharing approach, which we've seen in other industries too.
Yeah, I mean, society and multiple industries, including aviation, are so data rich. I mean, there's so much data out there that is being captured, but not really being used the way it could be. So I think AI and machine learning are two technologies that are definitely opening up the opportunities for how to use that data. I do find it interesting, just thinking about where you draw the line for the boundaries of data, and I find it interesting that case studies or use cases like this where organizations are really thinking outside the box of not just looking at their own internal transactional data, but looking more broadly at other data sets. And I think it seems like that's something that will be the future, because that's really the best way to get maximum and optimized use of AI, machine learning, and other technologies, is to leverage all the data that's out there, not just the data that you own or that you have, on your systems in the cloud or wherever it is.
Yeah, that concept of that interoperability, but through different platforms that might not be a part of an enterprise technology stack, but
Right.
also just outside of those strategic partnerships. So I'm curious, why do you think, and this might be a very difficult question, but I like to, really
Those are your
put you on the
favorites.
spot. It's my favorite
Yeah.
thing to do. Why is digital transformation and digital strategy implementation so hard for the aviation industry?
Well, I think part of it is it's a fairly complex industry. It's a lot like utilities and energy. I know recently on the show we talked about utilities and energy being a particularly complex industry. We had an interview that focused on that space. Food and beverage tends to be somewhat complex too, just because you've got recipes and a lot of complexity in the manufacturing processes and traceability and regulatory things. And, within aviation, it's a similar kind of thing. You think about all the things that make a transformation complex, or make a business complex in general, which therefore will make a transformation within that complex business more complex. But you think about things like very capital intensive, a lot of maintenance, repair, and operation type of things that need to happen behind the scenes that are critical to the success of the organization. Certainly, obviously, the customer side of it, as far as the logistics of buying a ticket and buying um, and consuming the actual flight that you're going to be a part of. And then you've got all the regulatory stuff too on top of that, which adds additional complexity. So I think you just look at the complexity of the industry, and on a scale of 1 to 10, it might be an 8 or a 9 in terms of complexity, which means your digital transformation within those industries are going to be very complex as well.
Well, I feel as though the aviation industry is ripe for digital transformation. So here's to hoping with those incubation products that we can maybe look at a smoother sailing as we go into, or smoother flying, I should say, as we go
Yeah,
into the future.
absolutely. Next time I'm flying, I'm going to think about all the data that these airlines could and should be using to make my experience more enjoyable on those airlines.
Yeah, maybe you could like tell the person next to you and be that person that like puts up their book or puts in their headphones, like, please don't talk to
Yes,
me on.
exactly. I'll be that guy
Yeah,
that's
right,
that's
right.
annoying the people next to me. Want to talk about AI and other geeky stuff.
Hey, maybe they'll like it. I would. So,
Yeah,
but
you never
speaking
know.
of AI and geeky stuff, let's move into kind of the food tech scene in specifically the Africa market. So there's been a lot of movement there on the capital side. So we look at in specifically Africa, the biggest segment of restaurants, which is over a $50 billion industry, is smaller restaurants. These restaurants, as we see a lot of times in small to medium sized businesses, can't really integrate the bigger systems into their overall needs, or they run operations manually because they can't afford, or they don't have the flexibility for a different system. And we've recently seen, it's called Orda. It's a Nigerian food tech platform that provides cloud based restaurants operating systems that actually are catered to smaller independent restaurant owners. And recently they announced that they raised $3.4 million in seed investments in their
Hmm.
2-year startup.
Wow.
So, despite this growth, they bring a solution that's really unique by offering a cloud based platform that digitizes the overall operations, removes the pen and pencils, provides data insights to the actual restaurant owners, inventory management, those types of things, without a real playbook for the cloud in the Africa market. As we know, that can be a huge challenge. So, they've come into contact with their fair share of constraints. For instance, they had to configure a cloud based solution to work offline and let restaurants continue to log data in times when internet access was poor, for example. So, wondering how your reaction to these types of startups in emerging markets. Obviously, innovation is so important, but there can be some really challenging logistical constraints when it comes to launching a SaaS specifically based platform in these areas.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's one of those dark sides of the cloud that isn't well covered in the industry. In that, we have a big client that's an international client right now, and we've been involved with them for a few years now, and they have offices in pretty rural parts of the world, including throughout Africa, where internet connectivity is spotty at best. And I think in a lot of more developed societies where Wi-Fi is reliable, especially if you're in an urban area and you're in a fairly developed country, you sort of take for granted the fact that Wi-Fi is not necessarily everywhere, and reliable Wi-Fi and the speed that we need to be able to support data and transactions and all that stuff in the cloud is not available to a lot of people in the world. These aren't just it's not just random small isolated pockets of the world. These are pretty significant parts of the world. So I think that's something that you really have to take into account, is what is your backup plan and how are you going to function your business if and when you don't have access to real-time data and you don't have access to the cloud. How are you going to keep functioning? But I think it's super interesting in because Africa and developing countries in general oftentimes are more fragmented in industries like food and restaurants and things like that, things of that nature. I think it creates a unique opportunity, though, and certainly the cloud is a relatively low cost and easy way for a startup to build and deploy new types of technologies. But I think it's a great question: is how do you manage that downside risk of cloud, especially in a developing country or developing region like parts of Africa.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think it speaks a lot to the ability of these African startups to innovate, to create these workarounds that can still effectively support their client community that they have utilizing this, especially when we see these high growth type of models, kind of challenging the status quo. So, I always love a good underdog, which they don't seem to be. They seem to be going on the upper dog there.
Right.
But
And what country is this? Do you remember what country the startup that you're talking about is based?
Yes, it's in Nigeria. So they
Oh, in
have
Nigeria. Okay.
clients throughout Central Africa into the South Africa market, as well as the Iron Coast or the Ivory Coast.
Ivory Coast. Okay.
It's the Iron Throne. We've had like a Game of Thrones theme throughout that. So,
Right.
but the Ivory Coast is what I mean. So, but they've raised almost $5 million in simply 2 years of funding, and brought in a very impressive executive team to kind of lead them into the area that they see this really large need on not only the actual operation side, but the distribution side they play in as well. So, very interesting, smaller company to definitely keep on our watch list.
Yeah, and it also goes to show that tech innovation and startups are happening everywhere, throughout the world, not just in any one concentrated, stereotypical uh, place like Silicon Valley in the U.S. or Ireland in Europe is known for its technology, but it's those areas plus a bunch of other areas in other parts of the world are pretty innovative when it comes to technology, which is pretty interesting.
Yes, of course. And of course, shameless plug, we do have a third stage Africa office, our EMEA office, and we recently did a digital stratosphere that's still available to listen on our events page. You can also go to stratosphere2022.com if you want to see all of our stratospheres, but highly recommend listening to specifically our CIO panel, all Africa based CIOs, one from the Middle East as well, that kind of talk about the digital transformation that's going on in that key market. So if you are interested in that, that's something that I highly recommend checking out as well. So,
Yeah, and another fun fact, just on a personal level, of all the places I've been to in the world, Africa is by far my favorite part to
really
visit, or my favorite region of the world to visit. So not only do we have an office there, but I have a personal affinity for the region as well.
excellent. Well, it sounds like we need a summit in Africa. Here
We
we
definitely
come.
do. Yeah, we've got to plan that for 23. You should get on that since you're our marketing
Oh, yeah,
director. If you
I
can just
will.
make that happen, that'd be great.
That sounds like approval, everybody. Do you hear approval?
Right. I should have thought that through before I made that public
Nope,
documented
it's
public
recorded.
statement.
It's forever. It's on the internet.
It's on the internet. Yep.
Oh man. Well, I kind of want to go into one of the trends that we've been seeing specifically in the last few weeks here in kind of the enterprise tech space. And it's that leaning out, that kind of hesitancy around a looming recession and what that might look like, and just overall tactics to kind of lean out and create efficiencies in specifically IT or enterprise technology. So one of those that's been a hot topic is this concept of BYOD. So bring your own device policies. And this is something that I just wanted to get your thought on from not only a technology standpoint, a cybersecurity standpoint, but also organizational change. So kind of a nice round out. So usually what this looks like is it has two main benefits. First and foremost, you don't have to purchase devices for every single new employee and have that resources on onboarding them, maintaining them. And then from an employee's perspective, they're working with devices that they're already familiar with, which has really become a difficult barrier in enterprise tech because we're so ingrained with you are an Android user or you're an Apple user. And that's kind of become a way of life. You don't see a lot of data around switching of those devices because the operating systems are so unique. You kind of become loyal to that. Um, of course, there's risks too. You could have potential holes in cybersecurity, and that might be enough to tell a company to say, no, that's not a great idea. But you have to make sure you have those clear policies and procedures in place, such as damage to the device, regular backups, and to ensure data integrity. But wanted to get your take on what you think about this specific tactic and leaning out a tech budget or creating efficiencies in technology operations.
Yeah, it's there's two sides of it. I mean, first and foremost, I'm overall the net my net opinion is that I'm in favor of the bring your own device to work sort of thing. In fact, when we started third stage, that was an early tenet. It was that people are going to bring their own devices, partly because when you're in startup mode, it certainly saves some upfront capital investment, but also because when you start a company, it's a lot of times for a lot of entrepreneurs, you want to create a company that you didn't get a chance to work at, or at the very least, it's a company you want to work at. And I always found it frustrating when you were just handed a laptop that may or may not be something you wanted, or may not, meet the needs of what you need to accomplish in your day-to-day job. And so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to give people the option to bring their own laptops. And I'm a Mac guy, for example, so I prefer Macs and Apple devices. But I understand that a lot of consultants, in fact, probably most consultants in the world, don't. So I certainly didn't want to impose a Mac sort of mandate across the company. So I think from a change management perspective and just a usability, employee experience, whatever you want to call it, I think it's mostly positive. But I think where you kind of alluded to this, I think the bigger concern and risk is, well, first of all, you are missing out on potential economies of scale. If you're a big company, the big companies that have big purchasing departments that go out and buy 1,000 laptops, obviously they're going to get a much better rate than what we pay for people to use their own devices. And we pay people a stipend, to use their own devices. There's some monetary incentive, or not incentive, but a payment that we make for people to use their own devices. But we'd probably save money if we just, we're a bigger company, or even now that we've got 50 or 60 people, if we were buying 50 or 60 laptops at a time, we're probably going to be lower per unit cost. But the even bigger risk, though, aside from the cost efficiency loss that you get from BYOD, is more the cybersecurity side of it. Just locking down the security is a little bit trickier, but we have an outside security firm that helps us do that, so we don't have to manage that. So as long as you're managing that security piece of it and the cost efficiency losses and the economies of scale losses are not material, then I think overall it could be a very positive thing.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you're saying is really going back to it depends, right? It depends on the organization, but it's important. I think what you're saying is to not just embrace trends, but to evaluate them, to know if they're right for your overall ecosystem and business, not only from a technology standpoint, a cost standpoint, but then also, how are you going to create a standardized policy around maintaining these machines or protecting them? So definitely something that we've seen grow, but may not be right for everyone.
Do you have a sense in the research of the article that you're referring to? Do you have a sense of roughly what percentage, or is it a
I don't.
majority of
I didn't
companies that are
see.
doing it? Or
Yeah, I didn't see a ton of data around that, which is why I think it's important to talk about trends are trends, but unless you have some significant numbers, and like you, I'd have to assume that it's more entrepreneurial startup type of organizations that can really overall hone in on that need or that ability. It's much difficult, obviously, if we're talking about Fortune 100 companies, to kind of standardize all of the different pieces that they're working with from a technology standpoint. So but I think it's definitely an interesting trend as we move into what does the technical workforce look like.
yeah, absolutely. Be curious to keep an eye on that and see how it evolves over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about, the rain in the cloud and get your umbrella out, because it's been a
More
rough
specifically, the
month.
cold rain. Is that
Oh, the cold
that's how
rain.
is that how you described it? And
Yeah,
I'm just
the
fascinated. It's so poetic. It
it
sounds
was.
poetic and technical at the same time. I'm
Yeah,
really curious to hear
cold
where you go with
rain
this.
in the cloud, absolutely. So it's really no secret, and I want to kind of talk about what your thoughts are on the cloud overall adoption, and then also purchasing of cloud software in 2023. So in November, right now when we record this episode, it's November 2022. It's been a really rough month for cloud software stocks. They experienced the worst week on record to kick off November and have really seen a slowdown in business spending after a wave of cloud adoption in the first 2 years of the pandemic. So there's two specific companies that are kind of bucking this trend, and I'm interested if you could tell us why, or what your thoughts are. Um, so they're in reporting next week. Two of the biggest names in the sector are cloud pioneer Salesforce CRM, and then Snowflake, which is a younger, new, up and coming company. Those two are winning. So I'm interested to see, why do you think they're winning, and what do you think the future is for this kind of fall off of cloud adoption or cloud software purchasing after a very high intense buying period in the pandemic?
Well, I don't know. My hypothesis would be, I don't know if this is true or not, but my hypothesis would be that it doesn't really have so much to do with the fact that the cloud is cooling off, or demand for cloud products are cooling off, because both products you mentioned, Salesforce and Snowflake, are cloud solutions. But I think maybe the bigger issue, or the bigger underlying issue, is that organizations are becoming less tolerant of big, massive, enterprise-wide technology deployments that may or may not deliver value. And when the economy is weak, like it is right now for much of the world, and inflation's high, um, unemployment's going up, there's layoffs happening, capital spending is being questioned a bit more than in the past. When you see that backdrop in years past, it's pretty common that you start to see the point solutions, the really high value, specific types of solutions, like Salesforce on the CRM side, Snowflake on the BI and analytics side, data lake, all that stuff. Those are really high value areas for a lot of organizations, where I think a lot of organizations would rather spend less money and really double down on something that they know is going to deliver value and they know it solves a specific problem, rather than going with, say, a potential money pit ERP sort of implementation, which many ERP implementations turn into money pits that fail to deliver value. So, I think it's a good thing, actually. I actually like, I don't want to say I like recessions because it's unfortunate for a lot of people, and that's insensitive of me to say that, but I do like the unintended consequence of a recession in that it forces companies to be a lot smarter. And during recessions, we see companies be a lot smarter. And when the economy is doing really well and the purse strings aren't so tight, they make really bad decisions that haunt them for years to come. And so I think, if you're going to look at a silver lining of a recession, that could be it. But I think that's probably what it is just more of the fact that Salesforce and Snowflake are two good examples of very focused, high value ROI types of solutions.
Interesting. So do you think as we go into 2023, there might not be a stop to that, but there might be more of a mindful approach to understanding, is there a real need for cloud software? As that continues to be the future, it just might not be as urgent and forced as it was during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like the pendulum swung pretty extreme during the pandemic because people realized we've got these old, outdated on-premise systems, and it's really hard to run a business when half your workforce or whatever is remote and you don't have a cloud system. And then you add, to the fact that software vendors are also imposing these arbitrary deadlines for you to get off their legacy on-premise systems. And it was just creating a lot of panic or false sense of urgency of having to invest in some sort of cloud solution now to replace their old systems for those two reasons. So and now that that's waning and people have sort of settled into the way the world's going to be going forward, now I think, you throw in a recession and companies are really, really rethinking that and really, looking objectively at the downside risk. One of my predictions that I posted out on multiple platforms, including YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, was that I said, right, and in fact, I have a whole video that focuses on this thread, as well as it's a prediction within a broader prediction video. But one of my predictions for 2023 is they would start to be the beginning of the end for big ERP vendors. And it's a controversial, based on the responses I'm getting on social media, I'm getting roasted by about half of the people that watch the video and tell me that I have no idea what I'm doing and a complete idiot. And I clearly have never been in the technology space, if that's what I think. And then the other half are saying, hey, I think you're right. I think that's a trend that could be emerging. And, time will tell if I'm right or wrong or somewhere in between. But the reason I bring it up, though, is it's clearly a controversial topic. This whole thing you're bringing up, it kind of opens up a Pandora's box of other issues of best of breed versus single integrated systems. And can ERP systems really deliver ROI, or are they doomed for failure? Are they doomed to be big, massive money pits? And that, there's a lot of other conversations we could have related to that. But I think to your initial question, I think, companies should just, be open-minded. I think anytime you get a industry telling you that there's only one answer, that's usually means there's something wrong with the message and or there's some sort of economic incentive driving that one size fits all answer.
Yeah, and I think, you summed it up in your last statement. There is no one size fits all answer, right? And I think that's what people are coming to be wise to. So the industry is becoming disrupted in that overall customer expectation that their needs are met, not that the needs need to meet the system. So that's, definitely something that we've seen emerging, which is excited for us because we've been saying that for a very long time. And, that's why people like to listen to you, because you are controversial and kind of saying what you really see as opposed to what somebody else tells you to see. So,
yeah. And if that's a topic that's of interest to you and you're listening, if you go to my TikTok channel, and I'm calling out TikTok because that's where the audience was a lot more brutal. YouTube is generally a favorable, friendly audience, I would say. I don't get a lot of negative hate messages or things like that, but on TikTok I do. And I think I don't know if it's because the younger kids just don't see things the way I do and vice versa, or if it's just something about the platform that encourages controversy. But if you go to, I have it pinned at the top of my TikTok channel, and you'll see it. It's called The Death of ERP. And if you read the comments, they're kind of entertaining. And we should probably, we've talked about potentially reading some of those comments on this podcast, just because some of them are pretty funny. Even the mean ones are funny in some ways. But it is an interesting, but I would love to hear people's comments, either there on TikTok or just comment here. What do you think about this whole point solution, cloud solution, best of breed movement versus single ERP systems? Do you see the pendulum swinging one way or the other? I'd love to see the comments in the wherever you're watching or listening to the show.
Yeah, and if you are a student listening to the show and we make you miserable every week, please be sure to tell us, because that cracks us up.
That's right. That was one of the, I forgot, where was that comment? Someone actually made that comment that I make their lives miserable because
Yep.
their professor forces them to watch all my videos. And
Yeah.
I couldn't help but think, well, you're welcome. I mean, what better way to spend your time than to watch videos of me talking about digital transformation? But this person did not agree at all. But I don't remember where that comment came from. Was it
It
on this
was
podcast?
on one of our live streams. So
Oh,
it
okay.
is up on our YouTube channel, but definitely makes us laugh, the younger generation and people. But at least there's passion out there towards
Yes.
technology and enterprise technology. So and
There
then
is
speaking
indeed.
of passion, you have one other disruptor that we're bringing on the show today, that is definitely helpful in the agnostic and independent software selection or software evaluation area of digital transformation.
Yeah, yeah. And she's actually a return guest. She's been on our show before, but it was a long time ago. She was probably, I'd say, in the first 2 or 3 months of launching this podcast, she was on the show, and we haven't had her since. Not intentionally, it just hasn't been on our schedules. But we do have a chance to have her back on the show here today, which I'm really excited for. And to your point, she is a fellow disruptor in the space. She's sort of doing something so basic and so simple that you wonder why it's disruptive, which is a whole nother conversation for another time. But her name is Bonnie Tinder, and she's the CEO and founder of a company called Raven Intel, which is essentially, it's like the Yelp of system integrators. So if you're looking for an SAP or Success Factors or any sort of specific technology system integrator, you can go to ravenintel.com and read actual customer reviews that have been vetted by she and her team. So she kind of, they eliminate the competitor spamming each other, knocking each other. These are actually verified customers that have feedback. It's quantitative feedback, qualitative feedback, a lot like Yelp or an Amazon review or whatever. So anyway, we're going to have her on the show to talk about these masses of data that she captures within Raven Intel. I just wanted to ask her some questions about what are some of the lessons, some of the patterns she's seeing as it relates to digital transformations and software implementations in 2022, and what should we be aware of as we plan our digital transformations in 2023. So we'll have Bonnie Tinder on the show as soon as we take a quick break. Well, first, we'll take a quick break, and you're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing landscape of digital transformation? Then you need our newly released 2023 Digital Transformation Report. This comprehensive report covers the latest trends, technologies, and strategies to ensure your digital transformation is optimized for success. The 2023 Digital Transformation Report is packed full of proven methodologies and insights from experts in the independent digital transformation field. You'll also receive practical insights on how to implement digital transformation strategies within your unique organization. This free report is available for download on our website at thirdstage-consulting.com under our Thought Leadership section.
Bad to the bone, bad to the bone, bad.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. This is the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation strategy, including the people, process, and technology sides of change. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as all the audio podcast platforms. So be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback on the show, and certainly leave in the comments any feedback you have as well. I'm excited for our next guest. We're going to have Bonnie Tinder, who is the CEO and founder of a company called Raven Intel, which is actually a website/platform where you can leave reviews of system integrators and technical implementers for various types of enterprise technologies. And we wanted to have her on the show to talk about lessons from software implementations in 2022, and more specifically, quantitative lessons. What's the data showing? What are customers struggling with? Where's the industry headed? And what should we be aware of as we plan our digital transformations in 2023? And by the way, you can learn more about Raven Intel and read some of the reviews that we're going to talk about here today by going to ravenintel.com. And that's spelled RAVENINTEL.com. And with us, as I mentioned, is Bonnie Tinder. Bonnie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. You've been on my podcast before. It's been a while, so it'll be good to catch up. And this is a great time of year to have you on the show because we can sort of look back at 2022 and look at what some of the lessons and trends are, and also look ahead to what is the digital transformation space hold for us and what's in store for 2023 as we look ahead to the new year. So I guess just to start, maybe just tell us a little bit about you personally. Tell us about your background and how you kind of grew up in this crazy digital transformation space that we're in.
Yeah, well, I'm located here in Chicago. Eric, I can see your snowy background here. Luckily, we don't have that just yet in Chicago.
Lucky.
I have I spent 25 years in the HR technology space, working for both large SaaS vendors as well as consulting firms. I actually started my career in implementation many moons ago before moving into marketing and analyst relations. And about 4 years ago, I started my company, Raven Intelligence, and have been in that world ever since.
Great. So you've seen a lot in your career, and I know we're going to hone in here on Raven Intel and talk about some of your findings from data that you've captured and analyzed from Raven Intel. But maybe tell us a little bit more about Raven Intel. What is it? What's the website? What's the purpose of it? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so ravenintel.com is our exact address. And we are a peer review site that helps software customers to make a great decision in a consulting partner, or the SIs, as we call them in the business. They're the partner that helps to implement a piece of enterprise software. And I started the company because nothing existed. There was zero transparency in this world of software consulting. And I wanted customers to know what they didn't know before they started an implementation. And so out on ravenintel.com, we have over 2,000 reviews written by customers about these enterprise software projects. And when you think about the word Raven, why did I name the company Raven? It really helps to provide this bird's eye view of implementation and partners. And we provide that data to the marketplace and look at trends overall in terms of the data, and can make sort of some correlations about what's happening in the world of software implementation based upon what customers are telling us about their projects. So that's what we do at ravenintel.com. Check us out. You can go out there and read all of the reviews that we have available for free.
That's great. And it's such a great resource for just objective views and objective experiences that organizations have had with different implementers and system integrators. Just out of curiosity, I'm already going off script. We had a list of questions that we agreed to ahead of time, and I'm already throwing in a curveball here. But I'm curious, when you started the company, were system integrators and software vendors open to the idea? Did they push back on it? Were they sort of skeptical of the whole idea? Because you're sort of exposing the good, the bad, the ugly of what people's real experiences were versus the marketing and sales messaging that most vendors and system integrators would prefer the customers or potential customers to hear. So how did they respond to you when you created the platform?
It was mixed, honestly. At first, I think there was a lot of hesitation because, this idea of transparency and allowing customers to have a public voice was new in the industry. I would say the best consulting firms ran toward it. They embraced the concept. They wanted to go and get all of their customers to write reviews because they knew that it would illustrate very clearly the positive customer success that they had. The ones who really shied away from it, and it was both a few software vendors as well as, quite honestly, the big consulting firms, the ones that have the money to advertise at the airport, they were the ones that, even to this day, there's hesitation because there's a lot of risk if they had bad implementations. And we know everybody has a bad, one or two bad implementations or more than that, in their portfolio. And so as much as possible, we want to have this platform available to everyone. But I would say, the best firms are the ones who are getting reviewed. And then there's firms that, are not participating potentially because, there's a mixed amount of sentiment about their projects.
Right. They don't necessarily want that truth to come out. But if you're a potential buyer, of course, you want to see the good and the bad. I mean, I guess if you think about, I've heard you describe Raven Intel as sort of like the Yelp for system integrators. And if you think about just choosing a restaurant or a plumber or a home repair person, you do all this research. We have apps to look at reviews and ratings and all that stuff, but we don't, up until you started Raven, we didn't really have that for our industry. So it's interesting that there'd be any sort of pushback on it because it's such a normal part of, the way we do research as humans now in the internet age.
Yeah. I mean, you buy a $3 product from Amazon and you can read 2,000 reviews about it. And yet customers are spending millions of dollars on these projects and didn't have, really any objective way to see, what was the other customer's experience beyond, what that particular SI was giving them for a reference. There wasn't any way to really look across and see, what was the candid voice of customer. And that's really why I felt like our industry needed it. And I started Raven.
Right. That's great. Well, good. Another, you're a fellow disruptor in the space, which I always enjoy chatting with people like you because you're not afraid to sort of bring that stuff to light. So that's great.
Our industry needs some mixing up. So yes,
they do.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's we've sort of been stuck in the same routines for 20 or 30 years, and not a whole lot's changed, unfortunately, since I started in the industry. But it really needs to if we're going to be more successful in this space. I guess just to start then, speaking of, shining a light on the industry and just looking into the good, the bad, the ugly of the industry, what are some of the high-level findings and implementation results when you look at data that you've captured on the platform here in 2022? What are the general lessons, takeaways, trends, findings, all that stuff for the year so far?
Well, I'll start first with sort of what customer focus has been. So, in general, 2022, we're coming off of pandemic and, getting back to work, a lot of companies back to office. And so this focus that customers are, have in digital transformation are, at least projects that I see, how do we care for a hybrid workforce? How do we provide digital tools to both remote workers as well as in-office workers that will help, improve the overall employee experience? I think the second thing, and that's sort of related to it, is the idea that, skills and skills management is a top priority. And, along with the great resignation, there has been, a continued war for talent. And particularly in professional services, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, we saw a tremendous amount of churn in the industry. People either leaving to get, to retire and not having, other new employees replace them. Or they're moving organizations, moving companies within the industry. And so there's this focus on how do we retain our top talent? How do we identify the skills that we have throughout the organization so that we can be strategic internally before, having to look externally for candidates? How can we get each and every employee to own their own career journey? So those macro trends, I think, are what caused such a tremendous amount of projects to happen, is that, these companies are realizing, hey, how do we do this? We haven't had to do this as much in the past. How can we quickly, flex to accommodating for some of these changes? So that's why I think there's been so many new digital transformations happening, is because of just the flux in the industry and change. In general, though, in terms of now, if I switch gears and look at what did we hear about these projects and what did we hear about implementations, in general, satisfaction is down slightly over 2021. And I think the customer grace that was given during the pandemic is gone. So related to this, or the data point that I have is that 25% of our customers who wrote reviews this year said that they will shop around before purchasing more software from the vendor that they just implemented. So 25% of them are already, thinking, well, before I purchase more software with this particular vendor, I'm certainly going to see what else is available out there. So
and is that higher than you've seen in years past, that 25%?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is. We also saw 20% of customers say they did not get the value that they expected from their projects. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. But that's a significant portion when you think about how big and how expensive and time consuming these projects are. So, only, 2 out of 10 said, it missed the mark.
And that's sort of an absolute question then. Is it like you did or you didn't get value out of your system integrator? So that's not even counting the ones that said, yeah, we sort of got some value, but not as much as we paid for or what we expected. Is that true?
That's correct. We asked the question, did you get full value, partial value, or in some cases, did you go backwards? And we have some of them, but the partial value one is that 20%. And then, we have a small portion that said we went backwards. Luckily, it's not that huge, but, again, that's, significant enough that, you have to stand up and take notice and think, that's a significant portion who, went through a huge process and felt like they got nothing for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting about the 25% that said that they would shop around for other options or other additions potentially to their existing software vendor, to me, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. It sounds like that might be a healthy outcome from 2022, is that, you're keeping your eyes open, keeping your options open, and not necessarily going all in and putting all your eggs in one basket of one software vendor. So some of these trends might be a good thing. Others might be more concerning, of course.
For sure. I think, best of breed has, is definitely becoming more in vogue. And, one of the, I think, things that we're seeing now in the Q4 of this year is that there's a growing share of renewals that are being delayed beyond their scheduled renew date. So 10 to 20% higher than last year. There are customers out there that are saying, or potentially questioning, do I renew the contract with our vendor? And that's, again, that delay is 10 to 20% higher than it was last year. And, I think customers are asking, do we need this? Are we using this? Can we reduce our spend? Can we delay purchasing? These are things that we typically see in Q4, but I think some of the economic headwinds that we're seeing right now, this is becoming, more and more a sentiment than it has been in years, and at least last year for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. And so, I guess another way maybe to rephrase this, or just make sure I'm tracking with you here. So what you're saying is that these cloud and SaaS subscriptions are in more, or at a higher rate, not being renewed. And so companies are maybe less likely now than they were in the past to just sort of blindly just keep rolling with the renewals, particularly if they're not using the software.
That's right. Okay. So they're delayed beyond their renewal date, which means that customers are either letting them lapse and will not renew, or they're late in making a payment on the existing system. And part of that is them questioning, is this something that we really need in 2023?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of companies, I think, in the rush to upgrade their technology, partially because of the pandemic, but also partially because a lot of the big software vendors are essentially forcing their customers off the legacy products and forcing them into an upgrade, in some cases prematurely. It sounds like that might be some of the fallout is, they're seeing that, hey, we kind of rushed into things. Maybe we overcommitted, overspend on technology, and now we're really trying to rationalize that a bit. Do you see that in later in the year here as the economy and inflation have sort of taken its toll across the world? Do you see that sort of picking up steam, later in the year as far as companies just being more diligent and conservative about how they spend money on technology?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And I think we saw that creep up sort of quickly, like as even November and October, were happening. But I think even now with all of the news of the layoffs across the board, even companies and Amazon who've never laid off employees, that's now, a thing. And so I think that's going to have downstream effects on purchasing, throughout, software. And, Eric, to your point earlier, a lot of people got overzealous with their purchases of cloud software, which led to a lot of shelfware. And I think where people's mind is at right now is, how much of this product are we actually using? And, I heard somebody refer to it as like there's going to be a SaaS red wedding out there for those applications that nobody's logged into for the last 45 days. So if it's not being used, it's going to get probably canceled in
Right.
2023.
Okay. We're here with Bonnie Tinder talking about some of the lessons from software implementations in 2022, as well as what to be aware of as we head into 2023. We have a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. I'm here with my co-host, Kyler Cheatham, as well as with Bonnie Tinder, who's our guest that we're talking about lessons from implementations in 2022, as well as what to look forward to in 2023. One thing I want to come back to that you mentioned, Bonnie, and actually this is a question from Diana on LinkedIn. She asked the question of, can you speak to project success and or satisfaction with 100% virtual implementations versus partial on-site project teams, and will we see a different trend in 2023? I know that was one of the first things you mentioned, was that the hybrid delivery teams has sort of changed the way people perceive and engage with their system integrators and their implementers. How does that, do you see a difference in project satisfaction of, among the teams that are maybe have more of a hybrid on-site role versus ones that are 100% remote? Is there any correlation there?
So I don't think there's a correlation necessarily with a delivery of implementation versus on-site teams. And I think a big difference that we have in the last 2 years in terms of virtual delivery is video, and how much more customers are familiar with, comfortable with a video based interaction. So, I don't think that there's been a significant change, positive or negative, relative to virtual delivery. What we have seen, though, is the project churn. The team churn is at an all-time high. So in 40% of the projects that we've saw reviewed in 2022, 40% of them said that their team changed somewhat or to a significant degree during the course of a project. So I think that has more to do with the negative satisfaction trend than does the delivery. Are you on site or are you remote? I think in 2023, we'll see more companies wanting to do remote delivery just because of, the reduced expense with that. And, but the idea that there's been a lot of churn and in professional services where people are moving, organization to organization, and also, even assignments internally, are changing. So particularly with the software vendors that have had an influx of projects, they may have taken project managers off one to go and start another. So that idea of churn is not a good thing for these type of projects because it leads to a lot of other things like projects being late, knowledge transfer not being there, just team dynamics not being as solid as, when you know the team and you've worked with them throughout the course of a project. So that churn, I think, is a bigger issue than the delivery on site versus remote.
Yeah, and that's always been a sore spot for implementations and system integrators, especially when you have a large team supporting you and you have some turnover on a project. That's always been a challenge, a problem, in a hiccup or a speed bump during a transformation. But what you're saying is that dynamic has become even more prevalent and more common, unfortunately, here in 2022.
Correct.
Are you getting any feedback from and you might have alluded to this a few minutes ago when you were talking about, building competencies and some of the internal dynamics of a project team, but are you seeing organizations respond differently in terms of how they hedge against that risk of, disruption to the project because of the turnover on their system integrator side?
Yeah. So I think, the companies who are, how should I say, well experienced with this type of contract negotiation write into their contract the specific team and put a penalty for that a flux in team. So that's one way we've seen that happen. I've also heard of clients who offer bonuses to their own internal team as well as to the external consulting team, a bonus at the end of the project for having stayed through the duration of a project as well. So that's one way to help insulate from personnel change.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, you can, there's a few different ways you can handle that. And we had Marcus Harris, who I think in the industry, who's an attorney that specializes in technology contracts and procurement, that sort of thing, from a legal perspective. But that's something that's interesting that I hadn't even heard him say was kind of working in some of these mechanisms to ensure or at least reward for consistency and continuity on the project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Here's an interesting question from I just lost it. Where is it? There it is. This is from, I apologize for butchering the name in advance, but Vaibhav on LinkedIn. He asked the question, any specific areas where companies have focused to spend in 2022? Maybe in particular, any trends you're seeing in terms of how and where companies are spending on technology. And he gives the example of, legacy app modernization or cybersecurity, or is it something else? What is it? Are you seeing trends in the types of technology that companies are spending on, or more open or against spending money on?
Mm-hmm. So I would say definitely in the HCM space, it has been a lot around employee engagement, skills development, and the ability to manage work teams as opposed to, like the infrastructure of HR. So it's like, how do we enable and empower our employees to move internally and to work cohesively across the business, department, and integrating, departments as opposed to looking at a department as a unit. So how do we enable that cross-pollination of employees? So I think there's a lot that was focused in the HCM space on those two areas. And certainly recruiting and talent acquisition. That was huge this year. I think looking ahead to next year, I think cybersecurity and the pure play niche vendors are going to have the highest revenue growth rates, and not necessarily anything that is viewed as non-must-have solutions. So cloud data warehousing, security, intelligence, automation, anything that can show how do we reduce costs, how do we reduce risk, those I think will be more, those will be of higher revenue growth than, systems that are perceived as not business necessary.
Yeah. It's interesting how it sometimes takes a recession or economic uncertainty to force organizations to really think harder and smarter about how they're spending money. Because everything you're saying, you think, okay, that it's interesting that that's an outcome of the economy and sort of some of the challenges we're experiencing in the economy. But in reality, those are things that organizations should probably be doing even in good economic times too. But a lot of times they don't. They get a little sloppy and careless with how they invest and deploy technology. So sometimes it takes economic uncertainty to get them to be more disciplined and focus on some of this fundamental basic. It sounds so basic when you're describing it, but yet so many organizations don't do that, during good times, especially.
And I think the big three questions customers are asking themselves are: number one, do we need it? Number two, can we reduce spend, in some way as a result of this, or, can we delay this project until, things are looking more positive in terms of macro economy.
Right. Interesting. Here's a question from Ronnie on YouTube. Ronnie asked the question, do you think massive cloud migrations are going to happen and have a bigger impact in 2023 than previous years in digital transformation projects? And what tech do you see being more relevant or prevalent in the market in 2023?
Mm-hmm. I think that there is still a tremendous demand for cloud migrations that will continue in 2023. And, I think the vendors that have a solution around, AI, customer and employee experience, and are enablers of, that sort of improved, experience, whether it's allowing customers to buy faster, easier, more efficiently, or employees to stay and engage and move internally. I think those are the software that we saw to have a tremendous amount of growth this past year and last year as well. Because there was so much demand to ensure that people have that full digital experience, as opposed to the legacy type of interactions that were had in the past.
Right. Now, you talked a little bit about best of breed and how the ones that specialize in certain functions or high value areas are likely to be more successful in 2023 and beyond. But here's a question from Vabhav again. And again, I apologize for butchering the name. But is there any trend on vendor consolidation across the globe or in the US? So as you look to these smaller niche providers, are you starting to see consolidation? Do you think, if not, do you think there will be consolidation of that space? Will Oracle and SAP and Microsoft and those guys just go out and buy these smaller niche best of breed providers, or what do you think will happen there?
I think so. And, I think one of the reasons that it wasn't more prevalent in this past year, although there was a lot of vendor consolidation that did happen. But, I think that there was some thought that, the price was inflated. So I think next year, especially if, some of these more small, the smaller niche vendors are struggling to grow revenue, they're going to be ripe to be acquired by the big guys if they have an attractive, value prop to an SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, et cetera. So I think there will be more of that in 2023 for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, what about this? This is a interesting question, and the part I find amusing is the account that is coming from on YouTube is an account called Business Productivity, and the question is there a need for business team productivity coaching in 2023? So it might be a rigged question here, but still, it's still a good one. Do you see business team productivity? And you talked a little bit about employee engagement and training and upskilling and things like that are becoming more prevalent, more common, more important to organizations, especially on the human capital management and HR tech side of things. Do you see productivity becoming a big thing, or continue? Is that changing in your view at all?
Absolutely. So the idea of business team productivity, I think there's always been a need for it, but what has changed in the last couple of years is this idea of productivity across the business. How do we, take our marketing department and have them easily be able to, be on the same sort of platform, same sort of productivity measurements as, sales or accounting. So how do we get all of the different business functions to work effectively and, efficiently together? I think that has been where some of the more modern technology has offered some real improvements than what has been had in the past. So it's the cross-functional efficiencies that I think are really hot right now.
Interesting, very interesting. So I had we sort of went on a detour. I took us on a detour as you were talking through some of the general trends, and I know we talked about general satisfaction and the hybrid work situation, turnover and churn and attrition on projects. What other trends are you seeing in the market here in 2022 that we should be aware of as we go into the new year?
So overall, just to give you a couple of hard metrics that we have, on-time delivery for projects was 58%. So in 42% of cases, projects were late. On budget average was 61%. So 39% of projects went over budget to some degree, some way over budget. So that's what we heard in 2022. I wouldn't say there was a significant amount of change there to what we've seen in years past. It's give or take 5% in both areas. So not huge. However, what has changed is the cost for professional services. And, like everything else, inflation has hit professional services as well. It's more expensive for these consulting firms to maintain and grow their teams with all of the competitive pressures and the war for talent. So it's more expensive to pay these consultants, which means that is, those costs are going to be passed along to clients. So there's inflation. I think just in general, the cost for professional services is more expensive than it has been in the past. Another thing that we're seeing are the bigger players moving downstream. So vendors who have been focused on the enterprise sized and jumbo deals are now lasering in on the mid-market. And by mid-market, that's, let's say, 5,000 employees and below. And so, many of the vendors with the bulk of their revenues coming from the customers that have 5,000 and plus employees have modified, some pricing and implementation strategies to cater to smaller organizations, because the mid-market is where, the high volume and growth will be in the future, as opposed to the jumbo projects. So we've seen, again, bigger fish, bigger names working within the mid-market and becoming more competitive with some more niche players. So I think that was something else that we have observed as well, like smaller deals that, use large software that we haven't seen in the past.
Interesting. Now, what about I'm gonna take a question and sort of spin it into my own question here, but this is from Rushi on YouTube. Asked the question: how's demand of Oracle Fusion functional consultants? And I guess just more broadly speaking, especially for those that are listening in that are maybe looking for, career guidance on what technology is going to provide the most opportunity or upside in 2023 and going forward. Are you seeing any specific vendors, not necessarily just in terms of market share, but just certain vendors that are really picking up steam or gaining momentum, or certain areas that are hotter than others in terms of specific vendors? Do you have any data that might shed some light on that?
I think in general, having certification and experience with the large, name brand vendors is a good thing. So, of course, Workday certified consultants are always in, tremendous demand, and that's also where we saw the biggest month churn last year. Specific to Oracle Fusion, I'm not exact. I wouldn't say that I'm have any specific expertise in that particular area. On the other hand, I think that there's a tremendous amount of purchases that are happening in that space. So, I would imagine that would be definitely a good skill set to have. SAP SuccessFactors, also the S/4HANA deals, there's a tremendous amount of growth there. So that sort of functional expertise, I think, would serve you well as well.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that, there hasn't been a material change to the on time and on budget metrics. You said it was sort of plus minus 5%, nothing, not a huge change. Whether or not those numbers are acceptable is a whole another story. But what you're saying is the trend's not really moving one way or the other. What if we look a little bit more broadly, not just at 2022, but sort of post-pandemic? Have those numbers changed in general since before the pandemic, especially with the remote, consulting support and the hybrid consulting support?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, they've gotten better since the pandemic, which is like the good news. When you look at our projects, though, that are reviewed, many of them are smaller in nature. And so the smaller projects are a little bit easier to keep on time and on budget when it's, 90 or 120 days versus the 18 months, which was typical pre-pandemic, more average sized projects. So on time, on budget has actually improved.
Interesting. Yeah, so maybe that's an upside or a silver lining to the pandemic, and that's super interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have thought maybe it might have slowed things down across the board. But I suppose organizations are just figuring out in general how to be more efficient and more effective with resources they have, especially now that I'll be curious to see if those numbers change at all with all the layoffs and organizations seemingly becoming more not conservative, but just leaner. They have less staff. As and there are a lot of companies that even the ones that aren't laying off are also putting hiring freezes in place and just sort of being conservative on the resource side of things. So I'll be curious to see if or how that affects transformations potentially in the future, because there's only so much you can outsource to an implementer and system integrator. You still need your internal resources to support the project if you want to be successful. So I'll be curious to see, I don't know if you have any thoughts or predictions on what might happen there, or if you think that will affect transformations in 23.
I think probably there will be an increase in need for staff augmentation. So the idea that, we'll lay off our full-time employees, but then, for the course of this particular project, we'll look to a third party to supply, resources internally that, are more fluid. So I think there's the potential for staff augmentation to be more in demand in this next year with some of those layoffs for sure.
Interesting. We're here with Bonnie Tinder talking about some of the lessons from software implementations in 2022, as well as what to be aware of as we head into 2023. We have a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The the bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings, and the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 Replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. I'm here with my co-host, Kyler Cheatham, as well as with Bonnie Tinder, who's our guest that we're talking about lessons from implementations in 2022, as well as what to look forward to in 2023. Somewhat of a related question from Third Stage Consulting on YouTube asked the question, are system integrators and their customers starting to learn how to be successful in their implementations? And what are the differences between successful teams versus those that struggle? So when you look at these reviews, do you get the sense that in the last year or so that SIs and the implementing organizations are really starting to crack the code on figuring out how to make these complex transformations successful? And regardless of your answer to that, are you seeing any differences in the patterns between organizations that have higher degrees of success and satisfaction than ones that don't?
Well, I would say history repeats itself. So to some degree, I think the customers who have been through it before have learned from their previous mistakes. I would say the customers who struggled with projects are the ones who put the cart before the horse and led with technology and worked backwards instead of leading with, a clear picture of what the outcome needs to be internally. What are the business drivers? What are the impacts that we want to have? And then working backwards from there. Transformations should be tech enabled and not tech led. And where we've seen issues happening is where customers get excited about a new piece of software and the bells and whistles of the software, and just do a lift and shift of their existing process and data into this new software. And lo and behold, all of those great features and functions don't solve the issue that they set out to in the first place. So the ones who struggle are the ones who get too wrapped up in software. I would say the second issue, and this is the age-old problem. So back 4 years ago when I started this company, and even before that, the projects that fail are the ones who rush the implementation without proper preparation and, a clear picture of what the outcomes need to be, and the ones that don't put the best people and best team on the project, both from an internal perspective and external. They're the ones that have a date in mind that, we need to get to a go live by X date. And, we'll put anybody on the project who can work on it, as opposed to being very thoughtful about who is the team that is going to get us to the most impactful results here. And, how can we make sure that by the date that we have in mind, we revisit our process, we revisit internal things that we need to do prior to, getting the software live.
Yeah, that's super interesting and really important. Two really important points you bring up, because if I could for a moment, I'll role play for a moment here and sort of I'll counter that, not with something I believe. This is something I strongly disagree with, but I'm going to role play with what typically happens in the sales cycle to counter those two things you just mentioned. Those two things I absolutely agree are critical, super critical to the success of a project. You don't want to lead with technology. You want to lead with your business goals and objectives. And then the second one you mentioned, which, gosh, I just lost it. It was the being
people.
ready. The people and the readiness and making sure you're ready for the implementation. So if I'm a software sales rep or system integrator, I don't want to hear that, because that's a problem for me, because I need you to go all in on my technology because I'm going to make more money, and I need you to start the project now. I've got 20 or 30 people I need to get staffed on this project next week, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make you not do those two things that you just said. So I'm going to say things like, hey, don't worry about, you do want to lead with technology, because I've got best practices. I've got pre-configured solutions, and you just use our software. That's going to define for you how your processes should look. So you should lead with the technology, would be my counter to that if I were a sales rep, which I'm not. But that's what I'd be saying if I were a software vendor or sales rep. I'd also be saying, hey, I've got 20 people that I'm ready to staff next week, but we're going to lose them. If you don't start this project next week, these 20 people, it's the A team, these are the best I've got, they're going to be gone. And so you better start the project next week, whether you're ready or not. And so the two super unhealthy counters to what you just said, but that's sort of the headwind you face when you're going into these projects, is you're going to hear something different oftentimes from the software vendor and system integrator that runs exactly opposite to what you just said, which is in your best interest, by the way. Everything you said is in your best interest. Everything I just said is not in your best interest. So how do you reconcile that? Or do you see organizations that, what you just described, those two things, do you see organizations doing that more, or is that still a challenge, or what do you think there?
Well, it's a reality to say, if a customer delays making a decision on a contract, SIs are not non-for-profit, so they need to put their best resources where they're actually, making money. So they're not going to just let them sit waiting for the customer, the software customer, to make a decision. On the other hand, there's a balance there. By the time that you are starting to work with a consulting firm, they can actually be instrumental in that preparation process. So you don't just call them in the minute that you're ready. I mean, they're the ones who are helping you think through, how do I need to change my processes before getting the piece of software in place. And when you can work with a good consulting firm early, they can help you plan that, put that blueprint together before you start, throwing a bunch of technology at your problem. And so I think the earlier you can, contract with a consulting firm, even, through the decision of what software is the right one for you, that's going to serve you well. Yeah. In terms of, software salespeople, they have quarterly numbers to hit, annual numbers to hit. And, so of course they want you billing as soon as possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, it's okay to challenge what you're being told or what's being recommended to you. I think what you said is accurate. You do need, on one hand, you need help. You want to make sure you're ready before you start deploying technology. On the other hand, you might need that outside help, and you probably do need that outside help to help you through that process. But I think it's okay to challenge. Do we need the entire army to show up now? Are we ready for that entire army to show up now? Because that's in the software vendor and system integrator's best interest. It might be that part of the team, some of the more effective projects we've seen in terms of how organizations have used system integrators effectively, is you bring in a small subset of that team first to help you get ready. Then you bring in the army, once you're ready. But the problem is a lot of times organizations don't ask the question of, wait, why are we bringing the whole army now? We're not, we haven't defined our processes yet, or we haven't figured out what we want to be and we grew up, and the meter's running now, now that we've got the army on site or on the project. So that's really good advice. And I think it's a good point. Here's more of a comment.
Even with the software purchase as well, you don't have to buy every single module from day one. And that's where a lot of regret is a lot of those turn into shelfware over time. Start small and then go from there.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because we're coming up on that time of year where not only is it the end of the calendar year, but for a lot of software vendors, it's the end of their fiscal year. And so a lot of them are trying really hard to hit their numbers. And in order to hit their numbers, they're willing to give you these allegedly one-time deals that expire at the end of December or at the end of whatever period, you might be in the future. So I think that's that's where a lot of companies get into trouble, is they get enamored by these great deals that they got, these great end of year deals, but then they still just overspent on technology that they're never going to use. So I think you have to be real careful with that. And I have yet to see a software vendor that did not honor a deal that they put in front of a customer. They'll say, you have to sign this by the end of December in order to get this one-time deal that I worked, all the way up to the CEO. I had to work this up the chain, and they always make a big deal about it, about how big of a deal it is that you're getting this one-time deal. But we've seen a lot of clients that say, hey, we're not ready to sign a contract for all of it now. We might bite off part of it now, but 6 months from now, when it is time to buy the rest, most of the time vendors are still going to honor that pricing because they want, they'd rather have that than no deal at all.
Right. Well, and I think about it like, going to Costco, and when you just need a jar of olives and you go to Costco and you get, 10 pounds of olives that end up going bad because you can't possibly, eat that many olives in a period of time. So even though it seemed like a great deal at the time, you probably would have been better off just, going to a local grocery store and getting what you needed in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What about, so Youssef on YouTube is asking as sort of a string of questions here. I'm gonna try and summarize it here. But he's talking about, he makes a comment about change management and business process mapping, which I presume, that came through the thread as we were talking about readiness and sort of preparing for your implementation. And then he makes a comment here that some cases, even the SI can do this part, but the best consultancy firms, I'm not sure what he means by that, but I want to get to this other question here that he had. But he talks about, but part of digital transformation is assessments, and then the best practice in the 2B. Without getting too technical or too much into project management here necessarily, how do you see organizations sort of navigating that sort of understanding of current state with the need for an improved future state?
Yeah. Well, here again, best consulting firms can help clients look, understand what the before and after picture could look like, and particularly for their industry, for the size of client that they are, they're going to be able to bring in a wealth of experience if they've worked with other clients like you. So the before and after, I think, a good consulting firm, that's part of why you spend a lot of money with them, is that they can help you think through what that after picture should be like and what's realistic. I would say the other thing in terms of change management, customers tend to shortchange this area, and it's one of the biggest regrets that we see, is that clients don't, they try and make their engagement scope as cheap as possible, or make the low cost as possible, and will take out some of the change management that's recommended, and really regret that in the long term, because change management is so critical to project success.
Interesting. Well, I just realized that I had lost track of time here, and this is a great discussion. I think there's a lot more we could talk about, but I think you've given us a good overview of what some of the findings and trends are that you're seeing in the Raven Intel platform. What sort of closing advice might you leave with customers that are about to embark on some sort of digital transformation in 2023, particularly as it relates to choosing and leveraging an outside consulting partner, system integrator, implementation partner? What sort of closing advice would you give based on some of these metrics and findings that you've shared so far?
I would say spend as much time looking and selecting the partner that you choose for your transformation as much as you do choosing your software, because the right partner can make a project successful, and yet the wrong partner, if you choose the best software, it can work against you as well. And so, making sure that you are aligned with your partner, that that you've done your homework and understand, what's the experience of others who have worked with this particular firm. That's huge, because a consulting firm can make and break your success. And so choosing the right one is critical in success for a project. And certainly that's where Raven Intel can help as well.
Yeah, and so if I go to Raven Intel, RAVENINTEL.com, I can see these reviews that you're talking about. I can see these for free. I don't need to pay or subscribe or anything like that. It's an open, sort of an open platform.
Yep, absolutely. You can look out there, and if you've done a project, review your partner out there and help others learn from your experience. We always are looking for customers to share what they've gone through, so others can learn from it. But absolutely. In addition to that, you can contact us, with questions. We can help you with a short list, based on the reviews that we have as well. So we are here to make implementations better.
All right. Thank you, Bonnie. Great conversation. And thank you for the audience questions as well. Those are really good threads of discussion. In fact, there's a lot that we're going to unpack here when we come back from a quick break. We'll take that quick break now. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Give me the sense to wonder.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham, and Kyler, we just had Bonnie Tinder on the show. We were talking about some of the lessons and the findings from thousands of reviews that customers have given to their system integrators in 2022, as well as what that means for planning for digital transformation in 2023. What were some of your takeaways and observations after listening in on that conversation?
Well, first of all, what a great resource to be able to have within our overall industry, to have kind of that user-generated feedback is incredibly valuable. I can only imagine how that must help to have that ability to kind of see other people's experience. And to her point, and yours too, I think it is mixing up the industry for the better, bringing out that transparency and accountability when it comes to real life experience, as opposed to those testimonials being taken through a marketing and sales pipeline of messaging and being transformed into something else. So it's definitely nice to see that movement in evolution towards transparency within having the ability to create those reviews and share experiences. So, I mean, that's just a good due diligence when going through a software selection. I wanted to ask you about some of the stats she shared. Specifically, I think what resonated me, it was the customer grace, and then the overall renewables, or renewing your software. It seems as though kind of what we talked about in the hot topics, just the overall tolerance in the industry for lack of, a customer-centric approach, or not being satisfied, being okay with kind of a medium service from software vendors or other integrators and partners. That seems to be moving away. Is that something that you've seen on the third stage side too, when you're having conversations with our specific client community?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we talked about in that opening segment today, companies tend to get more diligent and ask tougher questions when times are tough and when the economy is weak and there's financial uncertainty and employment uncertainty, capital spending uncertainty. And in a lot of ways, executives are being forced to ask these questions, which, again, back to the point I made in the opening segment, I think it's a silver lining of economic weakness is that it forces organizations to be a lot smarter. I think it always amazes me how organizations tend to get really lazy and sloppy in their decision making and in their actions when times are good, and these are decisions that haunt them for years to come. If you overspend, for example, on a subscription agreement, and you lock yourself into a really high cost structure and some unfavorable T's and C's, that's really hard to get out of. You can get out of it, but it's just because times are good and you're highly profitable and you're trying to use up all your budget for the year or whatever, things that like that happen during good times oftentimes. That's not a good reason to make bad decisions, but yet so many organizations do. And I'd argue the bigger organizations are actually worse at it. I mean, they make terrible decisions sometimes, and it always fascinates me that these large, massive companies are capable of making such poor decisions when it comes to, their long-term implementations and contractual commitments and all that sort of stuff. So so to answer your question, yes, we are seeing that a lot more right now, where companies are just being more diligent. They're focused on risk management. They're trying to focus on high value ROI, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. I think it's something I've always seen in my career, and every time it gets me is, going into a bigger organization, you think that, these people got it together. They know what they're doing. They got to this huge growth, and then you look at it and sometimes it can be a complete mess, which is where, technology comes in to help treat that, but it is not the cure, right? It's certainly just a treatment in a greater problem. And that brings me to some other things that you had talked about that I think are really interesting, and those have to do with productivity measurements and that concept of team synergy. So when you are going through a process of understanding what should be my technology identity within the organization, and how do I need that to achieve a certain amount of productivity, how do you go about doing that to ensure that not only you're achieving the results that you want, but you're also maintaining productivity throughout the implementation and transformation?
Well, I think just by asking that question and having any sort of focus on it, or at least having it on your radar, is step one. I mean, and it's a step one that, again, a lot of organizations miss, which you wouldn't think. As we talk about it, it doesn't sound like anything too crazy or too unusual, but it kind of is in a lot of ways, strangely enough. So I think that's the key, is to really focus on, where you want to get productivity. And maybe I'd broaden it a little bit, not just focus on productivity, but just in general, your benefits realization and value creation. Where do you expect to get value out of this deployment? And if you can't clearly articulate and quantify the value, whether it's a productivity metric or, increased revenue or increased customer experience, employee experience, whatever it is, whatever the business benefit is, if you can't quantify it, if you can't put your finger on it, then you have to question, well, why are we doing it then? Why are we deploying this particular technology? Or, maybe it's not a question of why are we deploying the technology, but why are we deploying it that way if it's not delivering, the potential business value there? And let's rethink that. How can we ensure that we actually get value out of that technology? And if we still can't get value out of that particular piece of technology, then you have to say, well, then why do it? Why waste the time and money on it? It's not, I know it's not cool to say in today's day and age, but it's not the end of the world if you keep using spreadsheets in a certain part of your business. If that's the easiest way to do things, it may not be ideal, but if you can't justify a big, massive investment in something to replace that spreadsheet, then, you've got to go back to the drawing board and figure out a better way.
And it seems like you both were saying that looking at the ability to have the milestone of value as opposed to the milestone of June 15th or May 1st, or having that really hard deadline, because that leads to mistakes. It leads to lack of transparency, those types of different things. So it seems like that's kind of what you were recommending, is to look at how you can make sure you're maximizing the benefits realization of the technology, not so much when it exactly is deployed. But I can imagine being an internal team going to your executive stakeholders and saying, all right, I want approval for this. huge investment for not only a cost but resources, and I'm going to have it done by X date. And that seems to be the expectation on these types of projects. So how do you coach your client sponsors, project sponsors, in having that conversation with the executive team to say, hey, we need to back up and look at different KPIs, not so much a hard date?
It's always beneficial, in my opinion, to show data and to quantify things, especially for executives. And in our 2023 digital transformation report, shameless plug here, if you want to download it, there's a link to the 2023 digital transformation report in this podcast episode. So if you, wherever you're watching or listening, just go down to the description field below the description of the podcast. You'll see a bunch of links. And usually the first one listed there is going to be the 2023 digital transformation report. But in that report, one of the data points that we have is that, first of all, when you look over the years, all the years that we've been doing digital transformations, just over half of digital transformations have some sort of material operational disruption at the time they go live. So in other words, they go live with new technology and something bad happens, like they can't ship product, they can't close the books, they can't run payroll, pretty catastrophic things. I'm not talking about sort of your typical hiccups where, Kyler had a little bit of trouble closing the books. It took a little longer than normal, but she still got it done. This is more like, no, Kyler couldn't do her job. She couldn't take a customer order. We couldn't ship the product to the customer. The customer got mad and they canceled the order, that sort of thing. Those are material operational disruptions that impact just over half of organizations that go through digital transformation. And that number hasn't really changed in the 15 years or so that we've been tracking this over the years. But the bigger metric, though, to be aware of, is that when you quantify the impact, the financial impact of those operational disruptions, oftentimes those disruptions and the cost of those disruptions dwarf the actual implementation cost. So in the rush or in the myopic focus of trying to minimize implementation costs, minimize implementation time, a lot of organizations are unknowingly and unintentionally creating a ton of extra costs later that far outweighs any sort of savings they might have gotten during the implementation. So I'm not suggesting that you should just go out there and blow your implementation budget, blow past your time frame, and just don't worry about it. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is be realistic and look at your total cost of ownership and look at the overall long-term impact, not just, are we going to go live on June 15th? Are we going to hit our, $10 million budget or whatever the budget is? That's important. Yes, you want to track that. You want to be aggressive. You want to be diligent. But if it turns into July 15th and $11 million or whatever the numbers might be, but that's going to minimize that long-term risk and that long-term cost, that might be the better decision for you. But a lot of organizations won't even entertain that option. So anyway, so to your question, if you can quantify this stuff, that's probably the best way to get the attention of executives. And one thing I like to ask our client executives is, what would the impact be if you couldn't ship product for 2 weeks? Like, how would that affect your business? And let's quantify that. What would the financial fallout from that be? And usually when you put numbers around that, you think, wow, that would be a massive risk that we just cannot take. And so then you think, okay, well, then you might want to think more about how aggressive you're trying to be in your implementation. Maybe there's a better way to mitigate that risk.
Absolutely. And, definitely an important conversation to have, which brings me to kind of my last point that I wanted to kind of touch on in that conversation, which is the quote unquote A-team sales approach when it comes to vendors. Because for me, we talk about team synergy, we talk about the importance of having an ability to work with all of the different partners involved in this. And if you have a software vendor that's having a pressure conversation around, we have this resource, and this resource, and if you don't do that today, then these are going to become unavailable to you. I can only imagine that can be a really, really hard decision and an effective sales tactic. So what would you say to an organization that's going through that situation or wants to ensure that they get the right support that matches them culturally and technically to be able to effectively implement the software that they've invested a lot of money in?
I think the most important thing you can do is just make sure you have visibility in transparency into what your system integrator is suggesting and why. So in other words, if you get the sense that you have a system integrator or potential implementation partner that's telling you not to look behind the curtain, not to worry about what's behind the curtain, we got this handled, Just know that we need to place X number of people on this project, and just know that we need to start next week. But they're not telling you why, and you don't fully understand why. I would view that as a red flag. You need to understand that before you move forward. And it may not be their fault. It may be your fault. I mean, maybe what you need to do is just take more, ask more difficult questions. And not that you want to be distrustful or assume the worst in people, but you do want to be skeptical and recognize that it's your business, and you need to make sure that you're navigating that accordingly. So there's a cultural piece, of course, that you want to make sure that people, to your point, that people, the people you bring in from the outside are going to fit in well with your team and understand your business and are going to work well with your team. But you also just want to know that you're ultimately going to be able to have ownership of this project with that system integrator, and that they're going to be transparent and forthcoming with you, and that you have a clear line of sight into what they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing. Even just, if they tell you they need 20 people on a project and they need those 20 people to start next week, then you ask why. What are these 20 people going to be doing? Do we need them all? Do we really need them all now? Could we maybe bring on 5 of them now and bring on the other 20 or the other 15 after we, define our business processes in more detail, or define our future state operating model and all that stuff? Those are just the types of questions that you can start to ask. So I think that's probably the biggest way to really see into or assess whether or not it's a good fit for you.
Well, this was such a great conversation. The Costco analogy really triggered me, because my husband is notorious for buying sour cream from Costco in this, like, who would ever eat that much sour cream? So I totally go with the less is more
Right.
approach in looking at what you actually need versus an excess of dairy products in your household or technology within your organization. So such a great conversation. Thank you for sharing all those great insights. I feel like you two should teach a software selection class 101 that we can all, subscribe to, so that everyone is able to actually select the best system for their organization that's going to reach their goals, not a vendor's goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. That's a good point. And thanks again to Bonnie for being here, and thanks for the great follow-up questions on that, Kyler, because there's a lot we didn't talk about, that we didn't dive into in a lot of details. So we'll have to have her back on the show. I like the idea of talking about software selection with her on a future episode. So maybe we'll have her back in 2023. Well, good. Well, thank you for that. We're going to shift gears, and speaking of entertaining guests and great guests, and also looking ahead to the future of where the industry is headed, we're excited to play you a clip of Tim Creasey, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Prosci, which, if you're not familiar with Prosci is an organization that will train and certify your team in organizational change management. And we're going to have him on the show, or we're going to replay you this clip where we had him on our show earlier this year talking about the future of change management. It was one of the better interviews we had on this podcast. It's one of your top 3 for the year. So we thought we'd replay this episode, or this interview. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have Tim Creasey from Prosci back on the show. But first, we'll take that break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Kyler Cheatham, and we're excited to play you a clip of a interview that we did earlier in 2022. It's one of our picks for the top 3 interviews of the year so far. And this is with Tim Creasey, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of Prosci, which is a change management certification organization. They've been around for, I think, 15 years or so. do a lot of certification and training within the change management field. And we had Tim on the show talking about the future of change management. So we thought we'd play this clip because it's that good. And it's a good topic as we plan for 2023 and we think about change management, which is the most important aspect of any digital transformation. So let's roll the clip here with Tim Creasey from Prosci. You and I are both from Colorado, so we share that connection as well. And it's funny what a small world this is. We're both in the world of change and business transformation and things like that, but yet we're both from Colorado too. So that's a good coincidence. So just to start, maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and also about Prosci for people that don't know what Prosci is. Maybe you could describe both yourself and the organization, if you don't mind.
Yeah, most certainly. So I'm Tim Creasey, Chief Innovation Officer at Prosci. I'll start with Prosci. It's an organization who's dedicated to help individuals and organizations build their own change capability so they can deliver more successful change outcomes. Really based in this notion that every change has a technical side and a people side. And we usually do a tremendous job investing time and energy and effort in the technical side, and we leave the people side to chance. And so Prosci as an organization has built out a discipline, tool set, methodology, training suite to help organizations conquer the challenges of change through the people that make up the organization. So that's Prosci. We serve the change practitioner community, certainly, which I think would be a lot of the folks, that come to your podcast, but we also go deep into organizations, realizing that leaders have a role in driving successful change. People managers have a role in driving successful change. We need project teams to speak the language of adoption and usage. So that's the way we support our clients as they grow kind of institutional organizational muscle and change. And then, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer. So I just celebrated 21 years with the firm about a week ago. And I kind of steer the innovation, really getting out in front of the community to talk about the challenges of change are unlockable with and through our people. I kind of have a funny role, Eric, right? Both in terms of really diving into the discipline, really taking something like the change practitioner competency model and really blowing it out as a way for practitioners to develop themselves. And I go speak at conferences where the audience has never even heard the phrase change management, just to help bring that mindset shift that successful change requires our people. And there's things that we can do about it to support our people through the change journeys that we ask them to take. So I kind of play on both of those ends in this role as the Chief Innovation Officer. It's been a wild journey, right? I was employee 9, and then we shrunk to about 3. And now we have a division that's called RPM that runs research, product, and marketing. And so to have a whole group of folks that are steering that part of the organization, it's really freed me up to get to do things like these podcasts.
Yeah, and really get the message out there about something that's so important. It's such an important discipline. And, Prosci fascinates me because, when I started off doing change management consulting back in the late 90s, there wasn't any formal training program. I mean, you had like Cotter and, some of the thought leaders in the change management space that had, more of that academic thought leadership. But as far as like a certified program that you can get certified in this discipline, it didn't really exist before.
Yeah, and we were founded by Jeff Hyatt. He was an engineer. And I, say the way Prosci got founded was an insatiably curious engineer started asking the question, why do some projects succeed and others not?
Interesting.
I mean, that was the crux of the question. The very first big detractor that he found when he started to really investigate that question was failing to get the adoption and usage we need of the solution from the people who, it's not that the buttons didn't work. It's that we didn't help our people bring that solution to life in the way they do their day-to-day jobs. And so that was over 25 years ago, right? That this curious engineer spots the people side of change as the challenge he wants to investigate and help others unlock through actionable, practical, accessible methodologies and tools. And so, that was kind of the genesis. But you're right, in the early 90s, late 90s, right? It's starting to hit the business lexicon. We've moved out of just kind of trying to better understand people and how human beings move through change. And people like Todd Jick and Cotter and Connor and even Spencer Johnson at the end of the 90s really started to put the people side of change onto the lexicon, right? That it's something we need to bring intentionality to if we want to achieve the results and outcomes of the changes we're investing in. And that's really where Prosci stepped in to really bring the research to the table and say, can we work with practitioners to understand what worked, what didn't, and what you would do differently next time? And they really start to build out the breadth and depth of this discipline that we call change management over the last 20 years.
Interesting. I mean, it's interesting. I had no idea that it was an engineer that founded Prosci, which I find fascinating because I think that's one of the problems with change management, or historically had been one of the problems, is it's so touchy-feely. It's sort of this vague, nebulous term, but you had that engineering discipline with more of a structured approach. That seems to be what Prosci is. So it makes sense that an engineer started it. I just didn't know that's how the origin was.
And I think that's why people got drawn to it, right, Eric? Because it threaded the needle between a systemic mechanical approach in view of the organization that the engineer has with business psychology, sociology, anthropology, all of the human components, because we know our organizations are made up with human beings. And so, yeah, I think it's a unique blend of structured intentionality around the human side of our organizations.
Gotcha. Well, I'd be curious to hear from the audience while we're getting going here on the conversation. How many of you have heard of Prosci, and how many of you maybe have taken a Prosci course, or maybe some of you are Prosci certified? I'd love to hear just in the audience if we've got any Prosci certified practitioners, or at least people that have heard of it or somewhat familiar with it. And certainly if you're not familiar with it, that's exactly why we have Tim on the show. So that's no problem either.
You want to hear one other little bit of backstory about the certification?
Yeah.
So 2001 is when we did that first. That's when I joined the firm. We built and released the first methodology as a toolkit, because Jeff envisioned Prosci as a product organization, books and binders, right? Like, this is the very first Prosci research report. You know, there's 2 of them that we know are in existence. It's 30 pages long. The current one's like 4.5 pounds. But he really envisioned the organization being a product organization selling books and binders that captured what we were learning about the people side of change. But people kept coming to us and saying, we need you to train us in this. We need you to train us in this. And so I kept hammering on him, and he came back and set the bar. And I think kudos to Jeff. I think this was a nugget of Prosci's success. He said, we are not going to build a 3-day training program. We're going to build a transformational experience that empowers people to feel like they can tackle a challenge that they never thought they could tackle before. It's not 3 days of lecture. It's a 3-day transformational, empowering experience. And if you can design to that, then we'll step into this training space. And this was back in 03, 04. And people who attended those early programs remember the days of chili cook-offs and karaoke up at a dude ranch out, in the mountains of Colorado. But it was around that mindset and tool set shift that was coming from seeing the people side of change as something we could navigate and manage.
Interesting. That's super interesting. I had no idea about the origins. In fact, when you and I first started talking about this interview, I thought you started Prosci just because your name has been so prominent and attached to it for so long. And you started out of college, is that right? Weren't you just out of college or something when you started there?
Yeah, I joined up with Prosci. I was going to go do a PhD in comparative economics because my background's in political science and economics. And my partner at the time, now wife and mother of my children, was getting a teaching degree. And so I needed to find something to do in northern Colorado for about 1.5 years until I went and did that PhD. And so sure enough, stepped into Prosci and became fascinated with what I call the microeconomics, right? If macroeconomics is how the economy is working and microeconomics is how a firm makes decisions, what really fascinates me is how Andy, Becky, Charlie, Debbie, Eric, what makes individuals tick, what makes them navigate and make the decisions that they make. And so microeconomics is kind of the academic lens I've kind of layered onto some of the learning that we've been doing for a couple of decades.
Interesting. That's very cool. Well, just to kind of turn into the audience here, just where some of the people are joining from today, we've got Justin from Pittsburgh. Thanks for being here, Justin. Robert is the one on LinkedIn who's watching on a treadmill, which is great multitasking. Talking about leading change, you've got to be able to multitask, and that's a good demonstration of it there. Dubai. We've got a couple people from Denver. So thanks for being here. We've got Ukraine. I won't show and list them all, but there's a global audience here. I know we've got Dubai in here as well. Ghana, Spokane, Washington, UAE again, as well as another one from Denver and Africa as well. So thanks for being here today. And in fact, one of the just kind of an interesting comment that just came up here on LinkedIn is just you can't lead big changes without Prosci. And that's a great testimony for someone who, by the way, also answered that they are certified in Prosci. So I guess, maybe just to start, when you look at the Prosci program and you guys deal with these organizations all over the world, and by the way, before I get into this question, and this relates to a comment here that's on LinkedIn, you guys are you offer this on a global scale, right? As far as the training, we've got a comment here that Prosci needs to step into Africa, but I believe you can get certified from Africa. Can you not?
Yeah, Prosci has, again, humble beginnings, right? In a small warehouse in northern Colorado is kind of where I started. We now have a physical footprint in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Caribbean, Latin America, and Spain and Portugal. But there is an affiliate network around the entire globe where you can access Prosci training programs. So within Africa, we have several partners. And if you Google Prosci Global Partner Network, you'll track down information about Cedar and Change, our friends that are down that way.
Great. So I guess just to jump into here about the problem statement that you guys are trying to solve with Prosci, and that is that the change is hard in general. Or if this was easy, you and I probably wouldn't be in business, quite frankly. You and I would probably you'd be in economics, and I don't know what I'd be doing, but it wouldn't be this probably. So change is hard. Organizations struggle with it. Why is that? You've seen so many organizations, you've certified so many people that are thirsting for learning about change, but why is it such a difficult discipline?
Well, I think it gets back to that notion, and I've been talking about the two sides of the change coin, right? That there's a technical side of every change where we design, develop, and deliver a solution that meets the need, the issue, the opportunity in front of us. You do a lot of work with your clients doing ERPs, right? That's one flavor of technical solution. CRMs would be electronic health records in a hospital, merger, acquisition. Even a new value system is a technical side of a change, right? The people side of the change is how do we get people to embrace, adopt, and use whatever that solution is. And although in this change discipline, if you've been a practitioner and you hear it called the soft side of change, it just makes your skin crawl, right? Because I think the reason it's hard, Eric, is that this is the harder side of change. The technical side of change can be incredibly complex. Merging two big organizations, absolutely. There's technical complexity in terms of pulling this financial systems together, branding, blah, blah, blah. The real hard side of the change is getting people to step into this new way of working. It's helping individuals navigate, step out of where they are today, step through whatever that transition, the liminal movement is going to be, and step into that new way of being. And so I think the reason it's hard is because the people side of change is the harder side of change. Now, historically, in a value system where your employees were incented for just, asking how high when you told them to jump, predictability, consistency, that was the value system historically. Change was easier then because the values aligned with asking somebody to do something different. But new value systems over the last 20 years, the emergence of, the interaction economy out of the service and knowledge economy, these things have all amplified the people side of change as something that we cannot just leave up to giving the right commands, but it's really around helping people navigate that journey. And I know we're going to end up talking about the pandemic too, but the pandemic just amplified. It made the people side of change impossible to ignore. If you were one of those organizations or projects that did ignore it and leave the people side of change to chance, historically.
Yeah. Okay, we're here listening in on an interview that we had earlier this year with Tim Creasey from Prosci. We're going to continue that conversation as soon as we take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing landscape of digital transformation? Then you need our newly released 2023 Digital Transformation Report. This comprehensive report covers the latest trends, technologies, and strategies to ensure your digital transformation is optimized for success. The 2023 Digital Transformation Report is packed full of proven methodologies and insights from experts in the independent digital transformation field. You'll also receive practical insights on how to implement digital transformation strategies within your unique organization. This free report is available for download on our website at thirdstage-consulting.com under our Thought Leadership section.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. We're here playing a replay of our interview earlier in 2022 with Tim Creasey, the Chief Innovation Officer of Prosci. Because we have a global audience, it might be worth asking, a lot of those dynamics you just described, as far as the difficulty of changing and the fact that in the past, maybe you could say jump and people just say how high, and that's not so much the case in today's organizational cultures. Do you see differences in different parts of the world or just differing organizational cultures and how these Prosci concepts are applied or how they navigate change in general? Or how does that affect, either a global culture and or an organizational culture? How does that affect, your change journey?
Yeah, I think you're spot on because I think culture is critically important. I do get a little bit provocative here. I'll say that culture is never the villain when a change fails, and it's never the hero when a change succeeds. We're big Marvel fans at our house, right? So culture is neither Thanos nor Captain America. Culture is. It's the water in which we're swimming. And so I think great change practitioners, it's their job to understand, adapt, and adjust to the culture into which they're bringing to life this particular change. So I guess kind of that's my first bent. I do think culture, certainly we get geographic variation in culture, but inside of organizations, we also get tremendous variation of culture, just because of the values, behaviors, beliefs. We unpacked this with research. This is kind of an interesting full circle notion of kind of the story of Prosci, where we have an attunement to the market, an understanding that change agents would like to better understand the culture they're stepping into and how it impacts the change journey they're about to attempt to navigate. And so we looked at a number of the different studies, the work that was done on organizational cultures, and came up with 6 cultural dimensions that impact how change comes to life. Because my other beef on the culture equation is that any of this kind of value laden, like good culture, bad culture. Culture is, and if it's not aligned with what you're trying to achieve as an organization, then you need to go about nudging the culture. So that's, I hate the good bad stuff kind of drives me crazy. So instead we went spectrums, because change is going to come to life different, right? So you take the first one would be, let's say, uncertainty avoidance as a spectrum. Some organizations have a very low uncertainty avoidance, a high tolerance of ambiguity. Others have the flip side, right? Neither is good nor bad, but they impact how change comes to life. And so we built a body of research that's contained in the Prosci, body of knowledge that says for each of these 6 cultural dimensions, individualism, collectivism, what are the challenges of bringing to life change in an individualistic culture? And what are the adaptations you need to make as a change practitioner? What about for a collective culture, right? Power distance. Is the organization this high or this high in terms of the orientation of where people think they need to get permission? Neither good nor bad, but this organization requires different change tactics than this organization. And so that's what we've built out in the research, is this whole set of, for each of these dimensions, what are the challenges and adaptations you would make depending on where you live in that cultural phenomenon. Culture is going to be really fascinating going forward, I think, because I've spoke a lot the last couple of years about the involuntary digital transformation. Mm-hmm. That's what happened in March of 2020, right? For all the talk of all the executives, of all the clients you help, right, about digital transformation leading up to March 2020. They were mostly enamored with the technological revolution. And then all of a sudden we saw the digital transformation happen during this instantaneous work from home experiment. The cultural transformation that organizations have in front of them cannot be allowed to be involuntary, right? We need to make sure that we step out in front of shaping the organizations that we want to live in and be part of as organizations going forward.
Yeah, it creates that thing that change initiatives oftentimes had historically struggled with, which is that burning platform for change. Like, if I'm an employee working for you, Tim, why do I need to change? I mean, why do we need to change? Why are you doing this to me? That sort of thing. And it sort of takes that conversation off the table and makes it a little less personal and more like we're all kind of in this together, and we're all trying to figure out how to navigate this new post-pandemic world.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Just a couple of comments here. One that's sort of relevant to what we were just talking about, and that is from Malcolm on LinkedIn. So his comment here is that many companies will happily spend money on consultancy and technology. And there's part two here, but not on education. Why? And training. How? So I guess that begs a question, or maybe I'll sort of spin that into a question that it triggered is. So companies are spending all this money on technology because they have to, or it's that involuntary transformation that you're talking about. They spend all this money, in many cases, tens of millions of dollars for a larger organization, maybe even more for a really big one. So, but they're not spending a lot of them are not spending adequate time and money on the education and the overall change management. It sort of goes back to my first question. Why is that? I mean, is it a blind spot of executives? They just don't understand anything beyond the soft side of change that you were talking about, or what do you think that dynamic is?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And to build on Malcolm's comment, the other one that we watch organizations fall into is we never find the money to spend to do it right the first time. Yeah. But we always find the money to do it the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth time. And so I think a lot of this is around getting smarter with how we're going to implement change and position change in the organization. One of the things we started to do, Eric, back in about 2013, 14, we introduced our ROI of change management, a calculator, a whole frame. But I wrote a paper one time. I never published it. I think I should. It's about, for human beings to make sense of anything, we need context and contrast. So here's a new idea that I'm trying to help you understand. Context is how does it relate to the stuff around it. Contrast is how is it similar or different to something I already know. And I think when we talk about the value of change management, we've unfortunately done it in absence of the context of the real value it's going to create. And so we started to really work to shift this language to, I started using the phrase people-dependent project ROI. What percentage of the project's ROI depends on people adopting and using the solution? It's somewhere between 0 and 100%. And one of my biggest pet peeves in the entire world is when people use the word literally incorrectly. But if you want to watch a project leader's gears or a senior leader's gears start to turn, ask them what percentage of this project's ROI depends on people adopting and using the change. And for our most important, most strategic projects, that number is 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, right? Out of the gate. And then we can ask the second question, which is what are we investing in driving the adoption and usage of the solution? And often we have $500 for mouse pads and coffee mugs. And so we've created that cognitive dissonance, right? That so much of the value of the change depends on adoption and usage, but historically we've not right-sized our investment in supporting the adoption and usage of that change. And I think, Eric, this is, a couple of my fun turns of phrase here that I played with is getting past the head nod. So that's one, right? Because 20 years ago when Prosci was really at the beginning of that change management journey, change management was still kind of the crazies in the corner. We hadn't even got the head nod. But over the last 10, 15 years, things have certainly shifted. And so now you're like, we need some change management on this. And, oh, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. And I need an hour on the agenda. Whoa. You need an hour of my time? I told you this change management stuff sounded good, right? And so getting past the head nod is that, it sounds good until, no, you need me to do something different. And that's where we test. Are we dealing with a passive buy-in? I'm passively bought into change management, or active buy-in by that senior leader, that they're willing to take the steps and make the investment to support the adoption and usage of the change. The other positional shift that we'll work at here is, that change management's an investment, not an expense.
Yeah.
If we see it as an expense line, it gets LIFO'd all the time. And do you have any supply chain background?
Yep.
I don't know if the audience does. LIFO is last in, first out. Or it's a way to manage inventory. It's also, unfortunately, what happens to change management on the agenda, on the budget. That if we've not anchored our value to the achievement of the project ROI, we're the last on the budget, the first off the budget. Last on the agenda, first off the agenda. But as soon as we start to anchor to the percentage delivery of that project ROI, that's the position shifter. I was working with this team, Eric. So a team in an IT, right? IT project team rolling out a big project. We sat down with them and we all did the CMROI calculator. So the change management ROI calculator. We go through and you put in all of the benefits and objectives of the project, how people dependent each one is. You do this big weighting. Out at the end comes the number 62%. So the team collectively arrived at a calculation that 62% of the project ROI depended on adoption and usage. And I'm not a betting man, but I would put money on the fact that it's not 62%, right?
Higher.
Just based purely on statistics, it's more likely 61 or 63 or 60 or 64, or like just a normal distribution. But all of a sudden they had a label, right? They began talking about the 62% in meetings. How are we doing on the 62%? Do we think we're lined up? Are we ready to, do we have that part of the organization moving to make sure we capture the 62%? They had a label for this concept of the people dependent portion of the project ROI. And it unlocked the conversations. It unlocked the way that they began to intentionally engage the people in the organization, because it wasn't just a communication and a training plan anymore. It was, what do we do to make sure we capture the 62% of this transformational technology we're rolling out? And so that context shifting, I think, is where we get out of the, is it nice to have? Maybe. I also think the pandemic proved that change management is not a nice to have anymore as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it disrupted people's worlds in a way that I think a lot of people can sort of see it and feel it and understand it a little bit better. But you bring up a really interesting point that I hadn't thought of before, which is that you're talking about, hanging your hat or being able to latch onto a number like that 65%, or whatever the number is for any organization. It's X% of the business value is tied to people. And I think that's really interesting, because I think a lot of organizations struggle with the inverse of that, which is sort of what you were saying before, which is the soft nature of change management. In that, a lot of times an organization will look at a hard dollar figure, like this transformation is going to cost us $10 million. Let's just say we're going to pay $10 million for new technology and a system integrator to implement it. That to them, that's a very real number. But then you start saying, well, and then we're going to spend $500,000, $1 million on change management. Then it's like, well, back to your LIFO point, or we could cut that $1 million and only spend $10 million instead of 11. But the problem is that $10 million that's not a real number. It's a number, but that number is not going to materialize that way if you don't invest in change management. So that's the other thing too, is like, it's not just value you're trying to get. It's also even more short-sighted than that. It's like, just that $10 million could quickly turn into $20 million if you don't spend that $1 million or whatever the number is on change management. And so it's like, I find too, you've got to counter that same concept you just described. You have to counter that on the cost side of other non-people aspects of the change as well. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. Before? Oh, for sure. Because you know what the two most costly letters in the project world are?
What?
R and E. Rescope, redesign, retrain, revisit, replatform, reteam, retreat, resign, right? When we don't think about the adoption and usage component of the solution, because there's always going to be the two sides of the coin. If we only focus on that $10 million technical solution for that digital transformation and leave the people side completely ignored, that's when it turns into a 20 or a 30 or a $40 million project with all kinds of re's, because we've only tended to this side of the coin. And both sides of the coin, we're not investing the $10 million in that that technology to invest in the technology, right? There is a to what end? There is a how are we as an organization going to be different once this technology has been brought to life? And that is what depends on that people side of change, right?
Right.
The buttons
Yeah.
work. The buttons work. It's whether or not we have become a more collaborative, integrated organization because we brought this technology to life, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's very true. And the other one last thing I'll add to that is the other. I don't know where it fits into the concept. I love that. I love that thought though, because that's absolutely true. Rescope, redo. Redoing stuff costs a lot of
Yeah.
money. But it's also like, what is the go live or the cutover to a new future state? What's that going to look like to you? Is it going to be? I guess it's a little bit different nuance from the business value that you were talking about. And this is just more. Don't shut down the operations. Don't screw up
Yep.
our time we transition, which a lot of companies do, and they don't quantify that. So if you can also quantify the risk, like if we can't ship product for a month, what does that look like? What does that do to our financial? And if you put it in that context, a lot of times especially if you can tie it back to that 65% or 75% that is driven by people, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more tangible to executives to say, well, we don't want that because we don't want to shut down operations or not ship product or not be able to close the books. Well, if you don't want to do that, you should probably invest in the people side because that's what's going to mitigate that risk largely.
Absolutely. If anybody's on LinkedIn and wants to go find, I have a Pulse article called "The Costs and Risks of Poor Adoption and Usage," and it's about a bullet list of about 400 costs and risks if we don't get the adoption and usage of the solution we need. And I've turned it into a poster. It's a really cool poster. It's like, and I tell people, I'm like, it's, the font's tiny and it's supposed to be, because the way you do is you print this out and sit down with the project leader and you say, all right, for this project, are we worried about any of these things? Attrition, unintended negative impact on customer, the loss of information, loss of, active resistance, passive resistance. There's all of those things that are part and parcel to the way the people side of change, gets executed and rolled out.
Right.
You want to hear one of these recost stories out of my personal life?
Yeah.
I got a couple of boys. They're building a new park here in Boise a number of years ago, and they put this big splash pad. Right. So these splash pads, it's hot here in Boise in the summer. And so there's water that shoots up from this big pad and the kids run around and get wet and cooled off. And so they build this park, put this huge splash pad in, and they paint it like a big, beautiful star, like a sunburst, oranges and yellows and reds. I mean, the thing is gorgeous. We show up about a week after the park opening and the water's turned off. And my oldest son, who doesn't mind running through every boundary ever set for him, goes, "Can I go talk to the guy in charge and find out why?" And I'm like, "Yeah, go for it." And he meanders up and says, "Why isn't the water turned on?" And the guy goes, "Well, it turns out the paint we used gets slippery when it gets wet."
Oh.
So the very first day they turn this thing on and kids are going, doosh, 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 right? Because we didn't think about the adoption and usage side of the coin. We painted it with paint. The paint was right. We hadn't thought about the adoption and usage of the solution. And so, especially in the tech space, I talk to folks, right? How often are you building a technical solution that gets slippery when it gets wet? Because you didn't actually go out and figure out when and how and where it was going to get brought to life. So,
Yeah.
the sad thing is, I mean, talk about the recosts here, right? Now they had to scrub this thing and get all the paint off. And to this day, it's probably 6-7 years later, it is a big, ugly cement splash pad that they had to undo and back out of because they didn't think about adoption and usage when they were concocting that solution. So,
yeah, that's super interesting and a good, simple, personal case study and you think about that on a larger scale, without employees and instead of a splash pad, you've got some kind of fancy new system you're putting in front of them, but they can't use it, don't want to use it, doesn't fit what the needs are, whatever the case may be. And you see that all the time. Here's a that I think a lot of people might be interested in. It's more of a general question about, you've been talking a lot about your research, articles you've written. You guys obviously do a lot of research. How can people find that research? Do they follow you on LinkedIn or do you have a resource hub or something that people can go to get some of that data?
Yeah, first place you want to go is prosci.com. There's loads of free information there. There's a whole entire resource center. There is multiple days of webinar recordings. I actually was building an article, I might release it this week, where I pulled 24 of my favorite webinar replays to build out essentially a literal professional development day, right? And these are all just free webinar replays. There's blogs, thought leadership articles. That's where you can access the research. And it's available in Prosci's Hub Solution Suite, which is our cloud-based tool platform. It includes tools for executing the methodology, learning tools, but then also all of the research is accessible and lives there too.
Great.
And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Yeah, so if you want to find me on LinkedIn, that's where you'd want to find me, especially if you want these professional development day of webinars coming in the next week.
Yeah, you put out really good content, and that's, you know, I've been following you for years now, and that's why I thought you started Prosci, because everything you put out, you've got really good stuff. So if you're not connected to Tim on LinkedIn, that's where I am most connected to you. So that seems to be a really good spot to connect with you. Okay, we're here listening in on an interview that we had earlier this year with Tim Creasey from Prosci. We're going to continue that conversation as soon as we take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. We're here playing a replay of our interview earlier in 2022 with Tim Creasey, the Chief Innovation Officer of Prosci. Here's an interesting question. I get this question all the time, and I honestly struggle with this. So I'd be curious to see if maybe you have a better answer than I've had historically, which is, what does it mean to spend money on change management? What exactly should firms spend on? Is there a dollar, or not a dollar amount, but maybe a percentage of your overall budget or something that you should think about? I mean, how do you quantify that for someone who's looking for something more tangible than just go spend more?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's not kind of a common, I don't think we've standardized on what goes into the change management budget. In the research, there's some pretty good data around what components people typically put into a change management budget. It's often a team member. You know, if it's not someone's job, it's no one's job. So a team member dedicated to driving the adoption and usage of the solution. Certainly training materials, communication materials, event, consultancy is where we actually see the dollars getting spent. You know, we see a wide range of investment of kind of percentage of project budget spent in change management. Usually the range will come in the 10 to 20%-ish range, but of course that depends on the nature of the change, the impact, the all of those components as well. Right, because I can think of a technology, in the technology space, I can think of a huge spend on a technology project that actually has a very small people-dependent project ROI, like a purely back-end hygiene. We got to spend a lot of money, but there's really two guys whose job is going to be impacted by this technology hygiene project. So it's a huge technology spend, but there'd be a very tiny percentage that's on change management. I can also envision tons of changes that have very little technical spend, a new values system, right? Prosci, our senior leadership team, rolled out a new set of values at the beginning of 2021. There's 6 words on these 6 awesome we statements underneath each of them. That was the technical side of the solution, but the people side of that change is all, right? That it's all in behavioral mindset shift, that component. And so I don't think we can just pick a number and say what percentage. It's almost always more than we are already. And off the side of the desk is a dangerous way to resource it. So, a couple of thoughts on the resource.
Have you ever met a executive or project team or an organization in general that said, you know what, we went through the transformation and there were highs and lows or whatever, but I really wish we would have spent a little bit less on change management. We overinvested in change management. We should have spent more time and money on the technology piece. Have you ever heard that in your career? Because I'm waiting to find someone who has.
Yeah, I have never yet come across the, what, we overdid it in terms of helping our people be ready and prepared and equipped for this. Yeah, if we would have just spent more on the technical side of the coin and less on the people side, I think, yeah, I've never ever heard anybody kind of go down that path.
And if you combine all the organizations that you and I have touched over 20 years or whatever it's been, I mean, that's a lot of organizations. That's a pretty big sample size, I'd say, not to say it doesn't exist. Maybe there's someone out there who has overspent. They wish they would have spent less. But I guess the reason I asked that question is you deal with organizations that haven't been through the process yet. And it's easy to say, well, change is different here. Yeah, I get it. Everyone else has problems with change. But here, everyone's excited about it. They want to get onto this new system. So I don't know why this is such a big deal. Why are we talking about change management? Everyone's on board. Do you get that dynamic as well, where it's sort of a blind spot that you're assuming that because your people are supportive of the project, that they're therefore not going to have problems adopting or adapting to the new changes?
Yeah, you run into a couple of these different blind spots, right? There's that one, there's we've delivered successful change in the past. Why do we need to do it differently this time? I think I can just tell people to do it. What I think is interesting when we've been with organizations that have been on a bit of a journey, at the beginning, it's around bringing structure and intent to the adoption and usage of a particular change, right? So often it's wrapped around that big technology transformation, a big major initiative where we realize the people side is critical enough that we're going to do something different this time. What's interesting is as organizations start to grow the muscle and it becomes repeatable, I kind of describe it like safety. You do a big manufacturing firm, then they do a big, huge safety push. And so you get all the policies, the procedures, the methodology, the protocol, the language. You got to get that stuff all embedded because eventually safety is job one, needs to be part of what everybody embraces. Similar to change, right? Change is everyone's job. That should be part of the moniker in the organization. But if we get to the point where change is everyone's job, it doesn't mean that change management goes away. It means it comes to life differently. Right? It gets manifested, the practitioners of change management, the professionals of change management in the organization become more enablers than executors of the practice. They're out there, right? It's a shift towards growing change muscle as an organization, resilience, tenacity, flexibility, durability, where the people side of change is the expectation, not the exception when we step into changes. But that's a long evolutionary journey to get to that point where it's really embedded into the DNA of the organization.
Right. And a sort of another question from the audience here that sort of piggybacks on that thought. And it's actually too long to include here, but I'll read the rest of it to you. So it's that behavioral and cultural change relies on reinforcement's consequences instead of predecessors and triggers. So the onus falls on leaders and managers to do something different, but it's often overlooked. And the crux of his question that didn't show in the text box here is, how do we flip the script in that failed projects are the fault of management, not end users? And I love that question because I think that's a scary question to ask. And especially if you're an executive listening, you might not want to hear this question or the answer, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I go right to the research, right? This is the very first one from 1998. We asked, what was the greatest contributor to successful change? And in this very first study, it was active and visible participation by our senior leaders. And in all 11 of Prosci's benchmarking studies, we've identified the number one success factor as active and visible sponsorship by our senior leaders. So it's interesting because that's not the script that you had in the chat of the end users are at fault for the failed change. That's not the script that we take to our organizations, to our clients. I mean, we get up in front of a group of senior leaders and say, hey, you all are the number one success factor and the number one obstacle to successful change. Your role in sponsoring change is beyond, it's not a title. It's a role and a responsibility. And to kind of go full circle on the Prosci story, this is where we lean back into the research, because we built a research basis for what is it that senior leaders need to do to be effective sponsors of change. And out of the research came active and visible participation, build coalitions, communicate directly, what we call the ABCs of sponsorship. So now we go into the organization and say, if you organization want to be able to outchange the competition, outchange digital transformation, outchange all of the things coming at you, your leaders need to grow the muscle of being great sponsors of change, which means they step into fulfilling their ABCs each time. When they decide to launch a project, they know it's beyond, the funding, signing a check and signing a charter. They know that they're signing a check, signing a charter, and signing up to be active and visible participants, build coalitions, and communicate directly. And that's where this muscle, where change management goes beyond a project by project discipline and becomes an embedded part of the organizational, how the organization operates. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And then Kelly on LinkedIn has another good point, which is more of a comment than a question, but curious to get your thoughts on if you've seen this work. But one way to get leadership involved is to set up a governance body with senior leaders, and as the change lead, require discussion and sometimes training on change leadership. Slip it into the governance chartering of the change effort, which I've always been a big believer in this whole Trojan horse approach to change management. I almost hate to use that term because it has a negative connotation, but you sort of have to. It's not even that you're misleading people in that way. It's more that you're sort of baking it in the overall DNA of the project, rather than saying, here, as you refer to them, these are the crazies off in the corner. They're going to be doing all the change stuff while we do all the real work over here. You gotta combine that and sort of make it part of the overall team. Have you seen that work effectively, or what are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, the analogy that our CEO Scott McAllister uses is that change management should be there to get the best supporting actor award. The
Nice.
best actor award always goes to the project, right? It is the initiative that senior leader put their money into bringing about. Change management's there to get the best supporting actor award, to help you achieve what you already signed up to deliver faster and more completely than you thought you're going to be able to anyways. And so I think that's really the notion of how do we help our senior leaders realize that investing in change management is an investment in delivering what they already promised to deliver, by addressing those, again, the biggest detractors of them delivering what they deliver. One of our other favorite clients, it's a state government here in the US. We had the COO come and speak to a company-wide meeting at Prosci last year. And her analogy that she uses is change management's like the water on the water slide. Like the dynamics of a slide is that you're going to end up at the bottom. Like this ERP is going to get rolled out no matter what. But do you want to go down the water slide without water, or do you want to put something in there to help ease that journey that people are going to be on? So,
Right.
We also have clients that'll build sponsor contracts. I mean, sit down with a sponsor, and the sponsor contract has 3 parts: why your role matters, what you can expect from me, and what I need from you. But it's really around establishing that expectation up front that change management's not something else. It is what you need senior leader to deliver on the promise of your most important initiatives.
Right. Yeah, that's a great sort of a capstone point, which is, how do you bake it into the project, and how do you make it sort of not a nice to have, like you mentioned before, not a bunch of crazies off in the corner, but more of a core integral part of your overall transformation. And there's actually, I've got a ton of questions that we did not get to. There's a ton of questions that the audience that I didn't get to from the audience. So clearly this is a very hot topic that a lot of people want to ask you questions. So we're out of time today, but I would love to have you back on the show again if you're ever open to that, because I think I could just take the questions we didn't get to today and probably fill another hour easily. Really appreciate you being here. There's a lot that I'd love to unpack with you in the future, but I think this is a good intro to what Prosci is, what change is, what some of the challenges are that organizations typically face, why change is important, how you can help sell it to your organization and make it part of your overall team. So really appreciate you being here today, Tim. This is super good stuff.
Yeah, Eric, thank you for the opportunity. I think, no, we really think this is meaningful work. It's the right way to treat our people to set them up for success when we ask them to take on a change. And this discipline is what has grown out to enable organizations and project teams to be more thoughtful about treating their people the right way. And the neat thing is, it delivers better results on time and on budget, and it helps our people navigate the challenges of change. So,
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
thanks for having me, Eric, and looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Best way to reach you: LinkedIn, ProSci.
Pro-
What else? Else you throw in there?
Yeah, prosci.com and LinkedIn are going to be the two best ways that you come track us down for sure.
All right, good stuff. Good to listen in on that interview again, and thank you, Tim, again for being on the show earlier this year. And he's another guest I'd love to have on the show again soon. In fact, we've got some things to unpack from that conversation, but first we'll take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 Replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 97. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world, including Google, Apple, Spotify, Pandora, etc. So be sure to check us out and subscribe wherever you listen or watch podcasts. So what were your thoughts on this interview with Tim, Kyler? I know it's been a few months since we had him on and we got a chance to listen in again. What were some of your takeaways, thoughts, or questions that came out of that conversation?
Yeah, well, Tim always does such a good job of really making the complex impact of a lack thereof change management plan and put it into kind of layman's terms to understand what can actually happen if you don't effectively plan for change. And I think in 2022, one of the biggest themes that at least I've noticed in digital transformation is the mainstream of change management. Everyone we talk to as thought leaders in this space, even Bonnie earlier this episode, said that truly change management is going to be something that's going to set your overall software selection, your software implementation, your digital transformation apart. I think the thing we have to do now, Eric, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, as Tim was saying, is we have to kind of define change management. What is change management? What is culture? And how does that actually intersect with the human part of a technology implementation?
Yeah, and what is it you want to be when you grow up as an organization, culturally and organizationally? And I love too, just tying it back to the conversation or the interview with Bonnie earlier in the episode. I love that Bonnie was so adamant about how the more successful implementations are the ones that don't start with technology. They use technology as an enabler. And I think the conversation with Tim and the interview with Tim further underscores that, in particular, the focus on people and how people are going to adapt to the new technology and the new processes and the new culture that you're trying to create. So I think, yeah, you want to create that future state and define that vision for who you want to be and what you want to be when you grow up, as part of your change strategy.
It truly is critical to not only define it, but then to communicate it and commit to it. I think that's kind of what Tim's saying throughout that interview, and you as well, is the need for that alignment to secure that around what are we moving towards as a unified group, as opposed to what is a technology going to pull us towards. It should be more of the propeller as opposed to the actual hook. That pushes those strategic initiatives forward, not that leads them. And understanding that dynamic is really critical to ensuring that you have the true benefits realization, and then also the user adoption, which is really a piece that many times people forget at the end of a digital transformation.
Yeah, and the other thing that really stood out that I remember from the first time, obviously when I was doing that interview several months ago, I love that part where he talks about I forgot how I'm paraphrasing it, but he said something to the effect of the most expensive and disruptive parts of an implementation is the word re. When you have to re-implement, recast a scope, or just basically redo an implementation, that's a lot more expensive than if you just do it right the first time. So yeah, he said it a lot better than I just did, but that was sort of the paraphrase of what he said. But I love that comment. Just anytime you have to redo something and use the word re, or the what do you call that? The first two letters of a word, when it starts with re, that's usually not a good thing.
Yeah, the resurrection process, and that's a lot of times what we do when we come in. And to your point earlier, that can be more expensive than your preliminary investment on the software as a purchase, and then also the implementation. Not to mention, you now have this change fatigue, or this overall mundane attitude in your culture around new technology because it didn't work the first time. It's just like anything else in human psychology that didn't work the first time. Now you have another layer to combat in order to make that implementation successful and those benefits realized.
Yeah, absolutely. And change management is a great way to realize value. I think too often people think of it as something that's a nice to have or a touchy-feely work stream in terms of change management. But it really, if you do it right, it should be something that's delivering tangible business value. And if you skimp on it and you don't invest in it, you're going to pay for it exponentially multiple times over later on, when you have to either redo something and or fail to get the business value, or even worse, get negative business value because your people aren't adapting to the technology and you just didn't deploy it effectively.
Absolutely. And to Eric's point earlier, if you do have questions about change management, like we said, it can be a gray area, sometimes hard to define and very unique to each organization. That free 2023 digital transformation report goes through all of the key metrics that we recommend looking at when it comes to change management, and overall understanding a tactical approach and a strategic approach, as opposed to just talking about how you want, a happy, harmonious culture. It can be very easier said than done.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have, in addition to the 2023 digital transformation report, we also have our guide to organizational change management too, which sort of dives in and unpacks a lot of what we talked about with Tim in more detail, more specifically in the context of a digital transformation or ERP implementation or some other enterprise tech implementation. So be sure to check that out. And that link is in the description of this podcast episode as well. Wherever you're listening or watching, just go to the description and you'll find the link to both the transformation report, the 2023 transformation report, as well as the guide to change management, which will ideally help augment and build on some of the concepts we talked about with Tim. So good. Well, thank you for another great episode. That was an entertaining, your second of top three interviews of 2022 so far. So now I'm really excited to hear what the third one is, because I have no idea what it is. So, and if you missed it last week, we played your other choice, which remind me again, what was it? It seems so long ago already. It was a week
I know,
ago.
right? It was with John from Lockheed Martin about the overall HR metrics and the measurement of success on the human side. So obviously I love the human side of digital transformation, but I'll try and pick a more technical one next week.
Yeah. So if you want to see the last one that Kyler chose as the first of three that were in our top three, check out the third segment of last week's episode number 96, where we had John Heiliger from Lockheed Martin talking about workforce analytics. So that's a good one to check out as well. And then coming up later in a few weeks, we'll do our top 10 countdown as well and play you some clips of the top 10 clips of. We haven't decided yet if we're going to do it for the year or do it like of all time, because we're 2 years into this podcast. We're coming up on episode number 100. We might do it of all time. We'll see. Depends on how ambitious we want to get during the holidays, the end of year holiday season here. So either way, stick around. We'll have new episodes every Wednesday. So be sure to check us out next Wednesday as well. And you can also go back and listen to any of the other 96 episodes that you haven't checked out, or if there's certain segments you want to check out, you can go back and view that either in our YouTube playlist, or you can go to any of the audio podcast platforms too, and obviously download any or all of the past 96 episodes. I suppose if you're going to watch them all, you're looking at a bit of a time commitment. You're probably looking at 200 to 300 hours of pure learning and entertainment pleasure. I don't know if you want to go that far or not, but you can if you want to. So be sure to check it out if there's any past episodes you missed. Great show again today, Kyler, and thank you to our guests and to our audience for such great participation. We'll look forward to seeing you next week on Transformation Ground Control. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we will see you soon. Take care.